sure.
Absolutely. Yay! Happy Capstone Presentation Night. Thank you to our friends and supporters who showed up with you guys. Of course, as I said, if we had the chance to review, so impressed by all the work that you were able to do in a semester. So they didn't have a year. This crew, the full-time students, have a semester to come up with a project, to find a partner, to execute the project, and now to present and put together a paper. So really fantastic job. I'm looking forward to presentations. For each presenter, it'll be like 10-minute presentation, 5-ish minute Q&A. So I recommend students, peers, please ask questions. Friends, guests, please ask questions. And you could feel free to push them a little bit, because the point of this presentation is sort of to give the framing for what they'll ultimately write in their final paper. So if anything isn't clear, you can certainly ask, or if you want a little bit more detail, ask that too. Other than that, my name's Casey, by the way. Nice to see so many faces. And then Kevin is up first, so I'll turn it over.
I don't know how to turn the screen on.
We'll never make it out of class like this.
On the little screen, there's a little button that says video mute. I should do it.
Video mute?
Yep.
Wow, check it out.
I'll give a 5-minute heads up to
5 minutes.
everyone.
Up.
Oh, and one more notice too. I think this door is fairly loud, so as you're presenting, people may come in and out, depending on people coming at different times. So we'll try and usher them in, and then you can do your best to ignore. Okay, now we're ready.
We're good? Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Brown. I am a second-year executive student. I'm actually finishing ahead of my cohort, so tonight and the next 2 weeks, my final 2 weeks of the Fels program. So thank you for listening tonight. My presentation is on the Community College of Philadelphia. It is a Fels Lab project. CCP engaged Fels and asked for our assistance with two things. One, an assessment of their community engagement process, and two, an application to the Carnegie Foundation for a community designation, which is a kind of honorific recognizing their work in the community. So I'm going to run through a few things with you today. First of all, a couple quick questions about the Community College of Philadelphia. A show of hands, please. Who's actually been to CCP? A couple hands, all right. Does anyone know someone who studies there? All right, cool. How many students do you think are at CCP? Any sense? 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 25,000? Yeah, about 25,000. All right, yeah. And what do you think a year costs at CCP? 4 classes a semester for 2 semesters. $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. How many? 50,000? 15, yeah, about $12,000 to $15,000. So why is that important? It's important because education matters, especially for that population, those who can afford $12,000 a year and people who live in the Philadelphia region. As the chart indicates, looking at the bottom, unemployment rates are higher and salaries are lower for those with less education. So community colleges do matter. In addition, in Philadelphia, as the red box indicates, those with higher or lower degrees of education are at a higher share of poor population. As you can see in this box here, the percentage of people in Philadelphia with an associate's degree, 20% are in poverty, and 39% without a degree are in poverty in Philadelphia. So again, education matters, and the Community College of Philadelphia helps serve this demographic. A quick agenda for today. We're going to review a background, the vision for CCP and their community engagement activities, going into some survey results and recommendations, and a conclusion, all in 10 minutes flat. So student information. Who are the students at the Community College of Philadelphia? Here are some figures and facts. Mostly women, 63% female at CCP, and mostly students of color. 51% are African American, 15% Latino and Hispanic, and 24% white. The median age is 23 and about 25,000 total students at CCP. It does celebrate and appreciate its diversity, and that's one of the key features of the institution. One part of CCP, looking at the student body, is what are their goals and their objectives. They have a 3-pronged strategic plan to increase credit and non-credit enrollment by 20% in the next 8 years, or 6 years now, to double the graduation rate, and the last one's long but important for community engagement, to double the number of opportunities for students to enroll in career programs, resulting in the attainment of marketable skills, leading to placement in a local and regional economy. That's long-winded, but that means engage community partners, businesses and nonprofits to give our students opportunities, because ultimately they stay in Philadelphia, so they benefit and the city benefits. So there are 5 parts to this plan, 1 to 5 up there. Most relevant for our work today is the student experience, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. 2 is workforce development, readiness, and economic innovation. And 3, right there, is external and internal community relations. So to achieve those 3 goals, CCP is focusing on these 5 pillars. So what is community engagement? It ranges for things that are obvious and a little more creative. There is service-based learning, there is community service, there's leadership, there's classes that take place in the community, giving back with skills. Nursing, for example, is a very common community engagement activity where nursing students go to the community to provide healthcare benefits and services to their communities. There's also at CCP the Institute for Community Engagement and Civic Leadership with these fast facts. There are 20 departments that engage the community, which is great, and there are 26 courses on campus that have some service learning integrated with it. So community engagement really serves all 3 of the strategic plan goals. The more they engage in the community, the more students really value and appreciate CCP. Since most students are within driving distance or in Philly, public transit or walking distance, the better we engage the community, the more those students want to attend CCP. The more students feel connected to the institution and their communities through support networks, mentors, guides, we can increase the graduation rate. And third is very clear, the more partners we have at CCP, the more our students benefit with jobs and job skills. So to assess its work, CCP conducted a survey, which is part of the Carnegie Foundation application. The survey was done before I arrived, so this is not a Fels directed or Fels guided survey, but it was still instructive. So a few highlights from that are as follows. Here are 3 charts from the administrator responses, looking from the top left. The first one is about departments that engage with community partners. It's high. Most administrators work in community, which is really encouraging. Top right, does your department budget support engagement with the community? This is a little discouraging. There are a lot of yeses, about half the responses were yes, but a lot of skips and a lot of no's and I don't know. In other words, budgets are not reflecting the values of the institution and community engagement. So maybe looking at the budgets to enhance engagement is a strategy. Bottom left, are you interested in becoming more involved? There's some people saying yes. I don't think the goal is 100%, but the fact that about half the respondents said that we are interested is an encouraging sign. With faculty responses, 3 more to show. Do you engage with community partners on behalf of the college? There were 16 yeses out of 57. That could be the ceiling. One lacking item is benchmarking of what really is the goal for CCP. So one recommendation that I have is to set some benchmarking and some goals. For example, it's probably not realistic to aim for 100%. Maybe 50%, maybe 60%, whatever it might be. So that is instructive in determining a baseline for future years. Top right, this one's really interesting to me. Does the community have a voice or role in the planning of community engaged courses? 8 of 14 said yes, but also again, a lot of skips. That suggests one thing: those who involve the community might think that is a worthwhile endeavor to seek their input and their voice, but the lack of answers indicates people might not give importance to that question. So it's worth exploring why so many people, faculty, skip that question. And last, are you becoming interested in becoming involved? Lots of no's. Lots of no's. So you wonder why so many no's, and that's worth exploring. So there are 3 recommendations that CCP can use to enhance its community engagement activities, focusing on assessment, the survey data, fundraising, and student opportunities. So assessments. We have all been through 2 years of Fels. We now know our surveys, our data from top to bottom, but it's important to look at what CCP gained through its own data experiences and what suggestions we can offer them to improve their data process. So I've identified 5 different suggestions for CCP to improve the data collection process. The first is to identify the purpose of the survey. I think a lot of the skips can be put in the category of why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And do I need to answer this question? Number 2, to increase the frequency of the survey. This is good for creating a longitudinal study for year over year to have data that they compare to past years. To broaden the survey audience, students were not included. Students are the lifeblood of the institution. 25,000 students were not asked to participate. So ask the students, get them involved, and also the community partners were not surveyed as well. So have them be part of the process. Let them know what we think of what they think of CCP. Obtain qualitative data, do some focus groups and interviews. In particular, CCP can interview its closest partners every year to say, how's it going? What's your feedback and how can we improve that relationship? And the fourth is to share results and celebrate success. There's some great stories to tell. CCP should tell those stories publicly to garner enthusiasm and generate support. Next, on fundraising, I won't even show you CCP's website. A for effort, but it does not get them where they need to go. To activate this plan requires more funds. So how do they generate more funds? Be more deliberate and more intentional with this fundraising approach. Top left is the Penn website. That's very clear. Where do you want to give? It's bright, it's colorful. What's the impact? Bottom right is Bucknell College with some examples of impact. Again, front and center impact. Here's another one from a community college, I think the Midwest, talking about the barriers to entry to education and gift equivalencies. CCP needs to tell its story better for its giving. A gift to CCP is a gift to students to help them graduate, a gift to students to build their workforce readiness, and a gift to Philadelphia. The more they can enhance the student experience, the more skills they gain, the better for our local economy. So with local philanthropists who care about these issues of poverty, job attainment, workforce readiness, a gift to CCP answers all those questions. That should be explored and it should really be cultivated and encouraged. So first of all, materials need to be improved, but they also need to tell their story with data and human stories. Third is student opportunities. One of the most interesting aspects is how big is a career services office? We think about our own experience at Fels or Penn or undergraduate institutions. We probably might complain about they didn't do enough for us. Were they present? Are they there? But this is a very telling story. Sorry, I'm going to skip ahead. Here at CCP, they have 3 staff members for 25,000 students. 3. You look at the averages across all institutions, means about 2,900 students per staff member. Down below, a bit hard to read, but for associate's degrees, it goes from 2,000 is the top 25% to the mean of 6,000. So 3 for 25,000 actually is not too far off the mean. But if CCP has a goal of to increase enrollment, double graduation rates, and to get students workforce ready, there is a need to better link those students with job opportunities, mentors, and career guides. So investing in career services ought to be a priority. Lastly, the institution can look at partnering with key employers. You look at the website, it does not really showcase or celebrate key partnerships. So CCP could look at first the top Fortune 500 companies in the region, then look at top private employers, and then nonprofits and healthcare institutions. Philly, for better or for worse, is largely eds and meds. Those are good jobs. A lot of us work in both those fields, but broadening the base beyond eds and meds is probably a key priority for CCP and its students. So in conclusion, for CCP to hit its 3 goals, it needs to really focus on community engagement, and to do so, assessment is a top priority, followed by fundraising to raise money to activate the program, then expand them, and third, to really focus on providing students with more career mentoring opportunities and career learning opportunities. Thanks for listening. Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably really worth including in my paper, so definitely going to add that. I know CCP is about, I think, 80% work in the region upon graduation, might be actually 85%. I don't know, Penn, there's often a conversation how to retain, the talented Penn graduates don't leave to New York or DC or Bay Area or whatever. So that's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah.
When you were talking about your recommendations, you said first we should do assessment and next. Was that a prioritization or was it just listing them? And if it was a prioritization, how did you decide which things should come first, second, and third?
It was a bit of prioritization, yes. I think arguably fundraising might be actually last, but I think it's really done intentionally. And the reason why I put first assessment is to get a better sense of what CCP does in terms of its impact and where it wants to go. I don't think it has a very strong case at the moment to fundraise for it, in part because data is limited, and the high-level data they have is very much like hours served, number of students, and it doesn't tell a really complete story. So I think diving into data would provide a more robust argument for why donors might want to give to CCP. And then if donors start giving, you can build programs and expand staff and connections to have more job opportunities and internships. Thanks for asking. That's a really great question. Yeah. Yeah. Burnett.
Sorry if you said this when you were presenting the results. What was the survey? It was just faculty, right?
Faculty and administrators.
Okay.
Yes.
Was it all of them? Was there a reason they only got, it was 57 respondents?
It's about 67 for each, about 67 to 70 for each. About a 50% response rate for each. My sense since before I arrived is that, like most institutions, the people in that office are stretched thin and did the best they could of what they had, and that was the best they could do.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure I, as the Fels Fellow for them, probably could have helped them more to pick up some of the slack between getting more responses in my time there. But I think it has to do with a lot of the communication around it and communicating the importance of the survey and the importance of community engagement. It's one of the things that's sort of embedded everywhere but really nowhere. And I think by elevating it, it would increase the likelihood of responses in the future. And I think more frequent surveys would show why it matters and why input matters. In my paper, I write for students and for community members. They can have like prizes, answer the survey and get a lunch with the dean or lunch with the president, or answer the survey, get pizza for a community group, that sort of thing.
One more question? I have one. I was wondering, and then we will switch, but one of my questions was, so I think the data, right, for the survey was a little limited,
Yes.
and we can accept that, but I think there were still some interesting findings. So thinking about sort of the recommendations you present, or the findings that you present from the survey, thinking specifically about the budget, and how they, faculty and departments aren't aware that there's any budgetary funds that could go towards community engagement. Is there a way to tie that with your recommendations to fundraise more explicitly?
I think so. I think probably one thing, a couple questions and your question made me think there's a communication piece that's sort of missing in it. And I'm not a communications expert, but a recommendation could be number 4, to communicate this stuff out more. Like to use the office to say there's funds available, there's extra money available. Maybe that's a recommendation that can emerge from this conversation. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
We have Matthew up next. But if anyone wants to grab some snacks, we have falafel and cheese. And then we're doing 10-minute presentations with like 2-3-minute Q&A. So please ask questions.
But if you need to take some time not to ask questions, now is the time to do it. Huh? Well, now you got everyone up and moving and getting cookies and like, it just seemed the quickest escape. Huh?
Yeah, Matt.
You do.
Okay, you got it. All right, ready?
No.
Take it away.
Great. So hi folks, I'm Forrest. I'm a full-time MPA grad, hopefully graduating in a month if all goes according to plan. I'm presenting on a local and state policy pilot strategy for the Local Initiative Support Corporation. I've been working closely with Jessica, who's joining us here today throughout this semester to learn more about LISC in the work they're doing and develop some recommendations from there. This is the very abbreviated version of about an hour I'm spending with the LIST staff on Monday. So this is the 10-minute condensed version of what that will be. And so we're going to dive right in. A brief overview of our 10 minutes together. I'm going to briefly introduce all of you to LISC and what they do, talk a little bit about why they want to pursue a policy pilot, and then talk through the approach I took for framing my recommendations for them, my outline of an implementation plan, and then I look forward to all of your wonderful questions at the end. So what is Philadelphia LISC? Philadelphia LISC is one of 31 local offices of LISC, which is a national nonprofit community development organization and community development financial institution. So what LISC does around the country is work to build resilient and inclusive communities by working with partners on the ground. So local nonprofits, organizations, CDCs, to help build capacity and identify opportunities to work in these 6 areas by building sustainable communities, promoting affordable housing, economic development, community engagement, creative placemaking, and community safety. A lot of this happens through both re-granting and then also working closely with the partners to develop plans, build capacity, and look at what taking action in their community looks like. So, why is LISC looking to create a state and local policy pilot? On the national level, LISC has a national office based out of DC, where they do a lot of engagement on the federal level, working in the federal government, lobbying to Congress and the executive branch, and they're looking to see what that looks like on a state and local level to more effectively engage policymakers both in Harrisburg and here in Philadelphia. And LISC Philadelphia is looking to see how this can kind of elevate the work of the partners to inform policy that elected representatives propose and defend, so that the voice of the partners on the ground working in Philadelphia communities are getting heard by elected officials, to make sure that elected officials are familiar with investments being made in their district. LISC is putting a lot of financial investment and people power into these communities, and so helping elected officials be more familiar with that. To align state and local policy views with LISC approach, so what elected officials are thinking about in Philadelphia and in Harrisburg is kind of looking through the lens of how LISC approaches community development and revitalization, and then to plan for greater engagement of state and local representatives to eventually get to a place where they know LISC and see them as a resource. So a lot of this came out of LISC completion of a strategic planning process and a theory of change, which identified the need for this pilot, and then they identified kind of this broad scope of why they want to engage in this work. So, like I said, throughout the semester, I've been meeting a lot with Jessica, brainstorming, learning more about LISC, what they've been doing, the organizations they work with. We've had some opportunity to communicate with some other LISC offices who are also piloting a policy pilot to see the type of work they're doing. And then I did a lot of background research on what it means to develop strategy, what it means to lobby, and how to do so effectively, and kind of framed my recommendations around 4 key areas, and I'll take you through each of those. So understanding key stakeholders, leveraging goals and objectives to set a roadmap for action, using data to understand what deserves further attention, and remaining adaptive to navigate a changing landscape. So I completely lost my train of thought. Just going to say that and move on, is to understand key stakeholder groups. And so an effective strategy is really asking what needs to be understood about state and local elected representatives and their partner community organizations, and then how do we get information directly from these stakeholders to make decisions based on real-time understanding of what's happening on the ground. So with that in mind, I'm proposing 4 recommendations to LISC. One is to organize their partners by issue area and districts to better identify opportunities where those partners can work together, and to know when elected officials are making decisions about who they need to inform, both if it's a policy issue or local to a community. And then also identifying geographies and issue areas for the elected representatives in the city and at the state. And so I've completed a tool for LISC to do those two things, kind of organizing in a spreadsheet all of the information about the partners and the elected representatives and how they overlap, that they can kind of leverage moving forward to continue to identify where opportunities arise around issue areas and geographies in the city to engage. My recommendation after that is to complete a stakeholder analysis for high priority representatives and identify existing connections. So taking time for the representatives who specifically represent geographies that LISC works in and heavily invest in, and kind of further understand how to draw connections to LISC work and what the representatives are interested in, and then also using their network to see who might know who to help build relationships. And then finally, more effectively leveraging social media platforms to track and engage stakeholders. A lot of our local representatives and state representatives are very active on social media and share a lot of information about what they're passionate about, what bills they're looking to propose, and what issues they're looking to move forward. And that's a really quick and easy way to organize and know what's coming next. And some easy ways to kind of keep that information together and kind of quickly get updated. Second is identifying goals and objectives to set a roadmap for action. So this was about understanding what LISC cares about, what our partners care about, and then what our elected representatives care about, and where is there overlap among those stakeholders. So what issues are high priority for all three groups, and then what actions can LISC take to help influence and elevate key stakeholders to move the policy pilot forward. So the first step is identifying kind of that issue alignment. From there, recommending they target high priority committees at the state and local level and follow activity. There are a lot of easy tools to use at the state level, as simple as calendar sharing. All the committees have their calendars available and you can link them up, to following the committees on social media, to subscribing to email updates, to know what's going on in these high priority committees. Also, developing fact sheets to inform elected representatives of what's happening in their districts, and then developing communication plans to keep partners informed of policy and legislation. They do this really strongly on the national level, and so I've taken some of what the national level has sent out and made some recommendations of how they can adapt that locally to keep their partners informed at what they're seeing representatives and committees doing around policy issues they care about. Three, I'm going to start moving fast because I'm out of time, is to use data to understand what deserves further attention. So in this case, data mostly refers to key information that they need to track to continue to make informed decisions, and ways that they can make decisions to inform what's worth LISC attention, because we can't be everywhere at once and they have limited time and energy. So some recommendations include using legislation tracking services to follow legislation and track data on who's sponsoring and opposing legislation. Track and then take that data and record it to identify trends around elected representatives, who's doing what, who's involved in what, and then develop a system to classify policy and legislation so they can easily make calls if this is something we don't need to worry about, something we need to keep our eye on, something we need to inform our partners about, or something we need to develop action around. And then finally, because we're dealing with the political landscape, remaining adaptive is really important to stay effective in this space. We know representatives change a lot. And so I want to make sure that LISC is prepared to operate in this space and has the tools to do so. There's 4 recommendations. One just starts with building relationships early before anything's needed. The best way to stay adaptive is when you already have, when you already have those tools. So before you're making an ask, you've developed that relationship. I've kind of outlined what I think an intern, LISC has an internship program, could start to do to track the work that's happening at the state and local level, and kind of continuously make recommendations as things are changing to adapt the pilot. 3, building space for ongoing discussion within the organizational culture around policy. So they're kind of constantly thinking about it and how it impacts their work. And then 4th, they're utilizing templates for communication that can easily be adapted as things change. I outlined an implementation plan for this that very much look forward to going in depth with LIST on Monday in terms of kind of the immediate short term, medium term, and long term in terms of rolling out those recommendations and things I think they can do in the next month and then build out over the course of this year. And those are my questions, and time went so much faster than when I walked through this myself. Thank you.
Jessica, can I put you on the spot first? Like, how does that resonate? I think you're our only client in the room. So does that resonate? Yeah.
It's because she likes me,
Do you
right?
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, so one of the requests that we had in that was to not create anything that would not be easily, that could coalesce into our work. And so it has to be stuff that is like really accessible. And one of the parts that he didn't have to do was an affordable housing policy. Instead, it was, we already have an affordable housing policy. Program office during affordable housing is actually really easy as a policy topic to target. It's everything else that's more difficult. And so what Matt created was an easy way for us to go in and out of spreadsheets and resources that we already are using, but just using a more mindful eye and a tool to track what we are learning as we're learning it. So it works for the way that our work flows through all of our program officers.
That's great. I know, I think I would have liked to see the tool.
I thought I had emailed it to myself and I did not, so it was not happening.
Fair enough.
But I will send it to you soon.
We'll all
So.
see. Any other questions?
Molly.
I know that our projects are a little bit similar, so I'm just wondering, like, how having a project that's more focused on infrastructure, like, are there any particular challenges, like, for infrastructure versus a straight research project that you encountered?
For me, my biggest challenge was organization because I had never done something like this before. And so I wanted to read kind of what they said in the field and what organizations were doing. And I really struggled on how to kind of overlay that and put things into buckets. And so that took me a while to figure out. I had like a long list of recommendations that were just kind of there, and then some stuff I had learned, and so drawing the connections between those took a while. And I think it was an interesting process, like Jessica said, kind of working in the current infrastructure of LIST helped kind of phase some things out that cost a lot of money, and then also required, I think, some creative thinking about what tools are out there that can be used to make up for that. So there's some very expensive legislation tracking tools. You can also subscribe to the committee calendars and get most of the same information with maybe like a few minutes of extra work to figure that out for free. So kind of sussing out some of that was interesting to get to like be creative in that way. I think, did I answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, one more? Yeah.
Last
question.
Does LIST want to sort of operate independently, or would you envision the group collaborating with those who advocate for similar issues?
Both. I think that's the goal,
Yeah.
right? I'm looking at Jessica for a nod to that. Yes, both.
It seems that, it's just good to get your own voice, but also collaborate.
Cool. Thank you.
Aaron is up next.
Oh, we only have 10 minutes, right? Not 15. Okay. we ready? Ready to go? Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Aaron Kelly, and I am a Fels MPA student who is going to be graduating here next month as well. For my capstone project, my capstone project is entitled "What is the Greater Renova Area Heritage Park Association?" That's very important, actually. Subtitled "Revisioning and Planning for a Successful Organizational Future." My advisor was Nick Torres. Apparently, he couldn't be here tonight, but he was actually very, very helpful. I actually directly went through some of his books and et cetera to help me along this process. It was very, very personal for, working with him, et cetera. So I always like to do this. Some of you might know where this is by now, just knowing who I am. I'm from a little town called Renovo in north central Pennsylvania. It's up in the middle of nowhere. This is taken from a place called Heiner View, which shows just the amazing terrain features and et cetera that we have up there. It's a very beautiful place. And the town is around the bend there, right around the bend. And this is what it looked like in the 1800s into the early 1900s. Pretty bustling town in the middle of nowhere. It acted as a midway point between Philadelphia and Erie on the Philadelphia-Erie Railroad. They had shops, it was pretty bustling. All the way through the 1960s and the 70s, you can see that it was still fairly used. Here's what those rail yards look like now. So, things have changed, obviously. The organization that I work with is called the Greater Renova Area Heritage Park Association, and their mission is to preserve what is left of the town. Their little logo is the tipple. This is called the coal tipple. They actually, would put cars there, and they would be able to pour the coal down from the structure. There's the old rail shops and et cetera. And this organization was founded around the year 2000. And they did generally preserve the tipple so far, and they're continuing to do so. But other than that, the other goal that they had was to create around this area right here, right around the base of the tipple, an actual park for the citizens of Renovo. Basically, this sign and those train cars in the back is actually pretty much how far they got at this point. So, as time progressed, though, they did get involved in some other things. Very wide-ranging things. These are some fundraisers that they do. The Blarney Bash they just had, they're having a Kentucky Derby party, etc. But this leaves you wondering, if you're just someone in town who doesn't know about this organization too much, what the heck do these people do? You see their name all over the place, but you wonder, what do they do? You go to their party, it's an Irish party, a casino night, etc., and you see a big sign across the tracks that say Greater Renova Area Heritage Park, but you wonder what they are. The problem is that the organization themselves also does not know what they are nowadays. So my project was a 3-phase project in order to help them figure out really who they are and then help them plan for the future. Phase 1 consisted of an informative survey that I conducted both online and in person with the citizens of Renovo and also with some of the organization members. Phase 2 was a revisioning workshop that lasted 4 hours. It was very long. It was attended by around 14 to 16 members of the organization, and I held their attention for about 3/4 of that time, and then they kind of got a little bit tired. But we were able to get a lot done, as you will see. And then finally, the 3rd phase is an action planning step, and this is sort of the phase I'm currently in right now. I'm trying to help prepare a 5-year plan for them so that going forward, they know exactly what they need to do to reach the goals that they want to reach. So, moving on to phase 1 here. These are pretty much the 2 goals for my survey. Basically, I wanted to find out what people knew about this organization, and then I wanted to know, do these people have a unified vision of what this organization really is? If people in the organization know what their vision is, and then also the people of the town know what the organization is. This is what my online survey looked like. It's just a general standard Google form. The in-person survey, I just took the same questions off of there and went and spoke with people. I walked around town, talked to some people on the street, I talked to some people in some local bars. It was a lot of fun. But I had a pretty wide range of the population talk with me. And so I'm going to highlight 3 things from this survey that I found. The first part is regards to the mission. I put a whole bunch of the different responses up here. I got quite a few more than this, but these are just some so that you can see sort of the variety in the responses. Some people did kind of know that the organization had, its mission was tied to heritage and et cetera. Other people didn't really even know that. As you can see down at the bottom, I did get a lot of I don't knows. I got it to help the community when I asked them what the mission was. Sure. But interestingly enough, around 52% of people did say, that history or heritage is tied into the mission somehow, and over 30% said that community was somehow tied into the mission. So that's important. So people do know that the organization's mission is tied in with heritage, but community also came up as a very important part of what they felt the organization's mission was. Moving on to the vision, again, I just want to give you a general overview of what people thought about the vision. As you can see here, fewer than half of the respondents actually answered the question with an actual vision statement. Over half of them either skipped it or said, I don't know. So that tells you something. Also, as you can see, most of these aren't really well thought out vision statements, period. Again, there's that support 4-H thing at the bottom there. But that's an issue because as my literature review showed, and after talking with people, a strong vision actually helps an organization drive forward and actually achieve the goals that it wants to achieve. So this is something that I felt that we needed to remedy. Finally, I asked people if they felt that the Renova Area Heritage Park Association was successful in some way. Most people said that they're successful or that they're somewhat successful, so that's good. But obviously we got some people who did say no, not really, they're barely successful, etc. The most interesting part of this part was that when I delved deeper into this question after I got their initial response and asked them, why do you feel that way? Most people said, I don't know. I don't know why I feel this way. I just think they're doing good things. So another part of having a strong, successful organization is making sure that you can hold yourself accountable to certain things and prove that you are actually meeting the goals that you want to meet. So here are some key takeaways. Just sort of summarizes the things that I already said. Additional comments. One major thing that I'd like to bring to your attention is that many respondents felt that there was a lack of effective communication inside the organization and out to the public, and I agree with them. And then moving on now to the Phase 2 revisioning workshop. For this, we had in these buildings, these are two historical buildings right in town. The one on the right used to be an old shoe store, and the one on the left was an old furniture store and mortuary. 3 floors were actually, 3 floors were a furniture store, the 4th floor was a mortuary. It actually worked out really well because there's an elevator in it and it can fit a sofa and a casket in it, so it works out. But we had these, the 4-hour-long session there. As you can see, the first half of this session was sort of a review of the organization. We talked about their financials, what people thought their existing mission, vision, and values were. I put them through their paces. I told them all the bad comments people had to say about them, all the good comments. I got it right out there. We reviewed what they felt was success for them, and et cetera. And then the second half of the 4-hour-long session was we did a lot of group activities where we delved deeper into these things and tried to actually define new populations, a theory, model of change, et cetera, measures of success for them, and a new mission, vision, and values. We got through all of this until we got to vision and values, and then at that point people were just like, I need to leave, it's almost 5:30, I have to have dinner. So I'm going to be going back to them with my recommendation of this, but we did get some things down, as I will show you here in a minute. This is what it looked like. Yes, I'm wearing pretty much the same outfit as but it was actually a very, very productive session. I had many people come up to me afterwards and say, wow, this really helped me understand who we are and who we should be. And the president actually said, we've never done something like this before, and it's very, very helpful. You really showed us what the people think about us, and you've really started a conversation. And something that's very important in something like this is even if I did not produce a third thing for them, if I did not actually produce a final document for them, the session itself, I think, was valuable enough for them because it was very, very helpful. It started conversations, and it will help them move forward into the future. One of the group activities we did was a group SWOT analysis. I broke them into small groups, had them kind of come up with this on their own, and then we talked about it together. Just in the interest of time, I just want to point out that location, you can see, is in 3 of the 4. It's actually in all 4 of them. I just forgot to put it in the threats as well. But that was very important to these people. They wanted to, however we move forward, they want to consider their location both an opportunity, a threat, a strength, and a weakness. Most of the strengths also related to being able to, someone said you can see the other people's hearts so clearly in the organization. They felt they were very honest, et cetera. And then again, financials, a weakness, but also an opportunity. They felt that there's possibility for growth and et cetera, and modification of their fundraising structure and et cetera in order to improve their financial situation. This is a very crazy map that we just brainstormed. Essentially, this is the theory of change model web in its very primitive form that I'm working on breaking down. So the top is sort of the social impact that they want to achieve. They want to kind of create or develop an existing culture of history and heritage in the area, because all of the Renova area is sort of, it was built by immigrants. Everyone there are descendants of immigrants, etc. And they wanted to tie that to community improvement somehow. And they decided that that's the greater social goals that they want to achieve in the future, is tying those things together and doing community improvement by somehow uniting it with the culture and developing that culture of history. And then down at the bottom, there's that. Almost done. I'm already speaking as fast as I can. Down at the bottom, it's just sort of the daily activities and programs and etc. that we felt that moving upwards would allow them to reach those things in the end. Finally, talked about, this is more like indicators and metrics and etc. Not just metrics, but we talked about different impact measurements, metrics and indicators and etc. I'm going to be distilling this a little bit more. Obviously, this is just a few ideas we brainstormed. But basically, they all agreed that they would hold themselves accountable to things such as this. And we felt that the most important thing is that new enterprises in town, other community functions, etc. Anything in community, if the community can be somehow quantitatively seen to be improving, then they will feel that they have done their job in town. So here are just some more takeaways. The last thing here, steering committee must take the job of enacting the final plan very seriously. They all understand that, and I'm going to help them through that process. The third step here is that I'm going to actually be putting together a plan, drawing from other best practices and etc., finalizing an actual document that will help them. And then we are going to work through an iterative refinement process where I work with them back and forth. I'm going to have a follow-up session, a 1-hour session, just to present these to them. They're going to finally adopt the plan, and then I'm going to continue to volunteer with them to ensure that the plan is enacted for the next 5 years, because they cannot get rid of me if they wanted to, and I could not get rid of them if I wanted to. So that's the way it works. But that's it. So thank you. Okay, so questions. I obviously talk a million miles a minute, but I hope you got something from that anyway. Yes.
You have talked before about how your town's really small and how this is one of the few charity and social organizations in the town. Is it necessarily a bad thing if they do a little bit of everything?
Right. So I personally think it's not a bad thing, but for an organization, we think that they really do need to sort of focus in a little bit, and I think that the people want that as well. Talking to people on the street. They can have their fingers in everything a little bit, but they need to sort of refocus and understand that that's what they're trying to do. If they're trying to focus on community improvement, we all decided that the best in their own best interests, their own best interests will be served by actually going out there and saying that they want to improve the community, and then they can do all these different things in the community, that they're already doing essentially, but tying it in so that they all understand exactly what they're trying to do. So, yeah, please.
Is it all volunteer or
Completely volunteer.
No one's paid?
No one yet. So it's an all-volunteer working board, but they're actually talking with AmeriCorps to possibly try to get someone full-time in there to figure things out for them. Yeah, so we'll see if anyone wants to go up there from AmeriCorps, middle of nowhere. But it's a beautiful area, so hopefully someone does get up there and helps them out. So, but I'm going to help along with that process as well. So, yes, please.
I'm just curious to hear how you first became involved in the organization.
So probably when I was in high school, I probably first heard of them. Rich Wyckoff is their president, and he was actually a former principal in the school district in the area. So everyone just kind of knew who he was. I being the very enthusiastic young high school senior that I was, just tried to get involved with the community as much as I could, etc. And I ended up being their webmaster for a little while. Not anymore, but just something like that. So, and then I love them. I think it's great to help the town, and I figured why not help them again here. So, yeah. That's my story with them. Anything else?
Thank you.
Feel free to talk to me more if you want to know more about this.
Thank you.
No, what?
everybody. Maybe. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Madeline O'Brien. I'm a second-year full-time student in the MPA program here at Penn. Slip of the tongue to tell you what's to come. And my project tonight is on graduate students' perceptions of public service careers. So I want you to think back to the first days of your undergrad or graduate school experience. Choosing a program, applying to schools, walking around campus on that Spring Accepted Students Day. What motivated you to pursue higher education? Regardless of what that motivation may be, there's no question that universities are speaking directly to our desire to make a positive impact on the world. And if you look at universities' marketing efforts, you'll notice a pattern. Change, good, world. The idea that universities are marketing based on they know that we have a desire to make a difference in the world around us. But are students who go through graduate programs actually ending up to go forward and make that positive change? If you look at surveys of MPA students, it turns out that this isn't the case. This is a study of Harvard MPP students from 2010. It shows students' interest in career sectors at the beginning of their graduate careers and again at the end. What you'll notice is a lot of students went into these programs thinking they wanted to work in government and nonprofits, and then left the program less interested in these public sector organizations and more interested in working for the private sector. Now, it's easy for institutions to blame this decline on structural problems in the public sector. When students from the before slide were interviewed about why they had lost interest in public service, things that came to mind were a skepticism of government or a belief in private sector skill sets. Additionally, if you look at problems like government shutdowns, pay freezes, hiring delays, the current president, not the most popular, it's really easy to come to the conclusion that that's the reason that people aren't pursuing public service. But is that really the whole story? Well, a lot of people have noticed the decline in interest in public sector careers. Very few people have taken the time to talk to graduate students in depth and see what's actually driving this movement to the private sector. So, this is where I come in, right? We put together a survey and interviewed 171 graduate students across different disciplines, across universities all across the country. Followed that up with 8 qualitative interviews based on our findings to try to really dig into why students are losing interest in the public sector. We wanted to focus on 4 variables presented in the literature that I reviewed to try to see what was impacting students' career choices. So the first thing we looked at was public service motivation. How do students' individual outlooks on the world shape their education and career choices? This is something that's been extensively studied through validated tools throughout the public administration literature and tends to look at factors of attractiveness of public policy, commitment to public policy, and self-sacrifice when trying to determine how students feel intrinsically about public service. In my study, the first thing I found is that while students in degree programs traditionally associated with public sector work had slightly higher levels of attraction to policymaking, across the board, students are actually pretty intrinsically motivated, even if they're not necessarily pursuing public sector graduate programs to go into public sector work. However, when you look at students' commitment to public sector work, you can see that these levels vary a lot across different degree programs. Interestingly, when I interviewed people, it seemed that this was a framing issue. For example, if you look at social master's students, social workers, I determined from talking to people that there's an effort on person-centered approaches and a lot of curriculum development around people's personal responsibility to make a service, which might explain this. Versus when I talked to PhD students about why their commitment to public service might be low, they talked about how their research was pushing them to this focus on knowledge for the good of knowledge's sake, and they could see that it'd be possible if maybe research was framed as a commitment to people, using research to help people, maybe they would look at it in a different way. It's also important to note that I didn't see any statistically significant results when I asked people about sacrifices they'd be willing to make for public service, like if they'd be willing to take a pay cut or a time cut. And interviews showed that most students who had gotten to a graduate program were pretty aware of the sacrifices the public service had required and made that decision anyway. Second, I looked at attractiveness of government. How do students' views on our largest public institution influence their perception of public work? This is twofold. One, looking at how students rate government as compared to private or nonprofit institutions. and also what students view as the role of government and how they trust government in their day-to-day lives. So, not surprisingly, I found that students who are studying public policy directly are the most likely to rate government as the most effective institution for solving public problems. You can see that social workers found nonprofits to be the most effective. Everyone else was a little bit mixed. And to me, that signals that our curriculum choices really influence how we feel about what sector is most influential in creating work. It's obvious for us as public administration students. We learned a lot about how government can solve public problems. Also, when I was comparing regulatory authority and spending authority and how students felt about government's power to do that, I found that students were much more comfortable with government having regulatory authority than they did having fiduciary power. When I asked students if they trusted government to spend their tax dollars responsibly, the numbers were kind of low. This is really important because if you choose to work for the government, you need to trust the government to give you a paycheck. Another thing that was interesting is when I interviewed some public administration students about this, they were frustrated because they said, government really pays for most public service out there, right? Government's providing grants to nonprofits, government's bankrolling a lot of social enterprise in the private sector. So this is something that people might not know what's going on when they're saying that they have this negative view. Third, I wanted to look at university investment, how universities' institutional investments and programs shape career choices. One thing that was interesting is most students think their academic support is better than their career support. So even though obviously getting through your classes, understanding your curriculum is really important, a lot of students don't feel like they're as adequately prepared to pursue career choices based on their programs. The one exception that's really interesting is over here in the professional students. And one thing that's important to note is law schools and business schools, a lot of times their ranking is tied to their placement rates. So they'll offer things like on-campus recruiting to try to push students into jobs to up their rankings. But on-campus recruiting primarily benefits the private sector because private sector organizations have the money to send organizations to recruitment and the money to hire more people. One thing I also found that was interesting was that PhD students are much less likely to have career sources as compared to master's students. This is really interesting because, as many of you know, there's a shortage of jobs in academia right now for tenured professors. And a lot of PhD students I spoke to said that they'd be really interested in public sector work as an alternative career path if they couldn't get a job as a professor. But because they lack those career resources, they had nobody that they could go to find about those opportunities. And the only career mentors that they have are their advisors, who obviously all work in academia. And the last thing I looked at was cost. Not only how students define costs, both in financial terms or in things like job security, but also how the cost of your degree and subsequent salary affects your decision-making. Interestingly, organizational mission is overwhelming students' number one consideration when choosing a job. You would think that salary would come in very important, but it was actually the third top consideration among students. Another thing I found interesting was that students really seek this return on investment in graduate education, regardless of their loan level. The way I've described it to people is sort of like when you buy a house. You know you're putting a $200 investment in a house and that it's going to grow with time, and that's set. When you put a $1,000 investment in your education, there's no guarantee that that money is going to come back. And students are afraid that the public sector isn't going to allow them to recoup that investment that they've put into their education. However, students did say that if they would be willing to take a lower paying job, they would want to retain that return in other ways, such as job training or positive workplace culture. There was a lot of frustration expressed by students that these organizations aren't just not paying a lot of money, but are also encouraging people to burn themselves out, creating an unhealthy work environment, so you're miserable and you're not getting paid, something I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. So looking at some recommendations that public sector institutions and universities can take to help drive more graduate students to the public sector. First, graduate programs across the board should be integrating curriculum, highlighting the distinctive value of public service. We can see from social workers, when a person-centered approach is implemented into the curriculum, people understand, people want to work in public service. Just makes sense. Second, government should be taking more credit for the programs that they fund in the nonprofit and private sector. Government is funneling all of these monies into programs that create public good, not taking any credit for it, and then taking it lying down when they're criticized for spending your money irresponsibly. They need to step up and take credit for the work that they're doing. Third, PhD students are an untapped resource for future public sector employees. It was clear from my discussion that PhD students are uniquely suited to want to pursue public work because they're already doing research which can easily be applied in a person-centered context. And there's also a gap in their career market that could easily be filled with positions such as government research. Next, universities and public sector organizations needed to develop the resources to make public sector employment financially viable for graduate educated employees. My research shows that it's not just enough to get somebody else to pay for your education. As long as it's costing $200,000, you feel the weight of the $200,000 that's put into your education. So my suggestion would be, as nonprofit institutions that currently pay no state or local taxes, universities should be using this free money that they're getting from the government and investing it back into public service programming to make those degrees cheaper. Lastly, public sector organizations need to emphasize their organizational culture and growth opportunities when recruiting millennial workers. It's not enough to have people coasting on the high that they have from helping other people. You need to make sure that your employers feel respected, that they're working a reasonable amount of hours, although obviously they still have to work hard, and that you're paying them a living wage. Ultimately, the goal of this research is to make sure that the promises that you saw on the first slide in this presentation are carried through when students enter their careers. If both universities and public sector organizations recognize the value of students who want to do public work and take meaningful steps to make that work a reality, we will all be one step further to creating a better world.
Did you, first of all, really well done. That's fantastic. I just went back to the corporate world. I've worked in nonprofits for a while, so my apologies. Did you find any examples of any level of government, like Philadelphia government, Pennsylvania government, national government, that is doing well in this area? Is there any sort of local factors or like anyone doing well, basically?
I didn't break it down by factors in like to local, state, and federal, but I think one thing that we noticed as you go down the grade and you're getting into state and then local, people are working harder for even less money. So at least at the federal level, people have things like tenure, you have the guaranteed step raises, even though there's a bureaucratic hiring process, once you get in, you're done, versus state and local government is even more of a grind than it is at the higher levels.
In regards to organizational culture, were there any kind of like management responses that is a good trade-off for like already a higher wage and like an equivalent like private sector position? You can have like flexible time, like managing benefits, like the answers to that.
So that's something that is more common in the public sector. In the public sector, they'll offer you things like more vacation days in exchange for less pay. I found, based on my survey's responses, that people weren't feeling that way. That even though if they were getting more vacation, they felt like they're being ridden so hard, forced to come in on the weekends, forced to work longer hours, that it didn't even out. I also found that students' answers, let me go down really quick. If you look at things that are most important to them, flexibility is actually pretty low on there. And yeah, I can't really read that well. Work-life balance is also relatively low on there, so those things weren't as important as organizational mission and location.
So you had mentioned talking about like the definition of public service and how one of your recommendations was government being more transparent about what they're spending their money on and how many programs are connected to that. Was that kind of the only thing did that just come out of your discussion, or were there other factors like doing this project that led you to that conclusion, or was just kind of what you heard from folks you talked to?
So I think that's a two-part answer, and I'm about to lose my train of thought. One, the thing about the government needs to take more credit for the money they spend, both came out of interview questions and out of my own research, like especially after seeing that so many people work in social work, primary socialized in nonprofits, love nonprofit work, looking where that money comes from. It's a direct pipeline. Second, I intentionally kept the definition of public service nebulous because I wanted to hear what people had to say. And I got some really interesting responses. For instance, in both business and in law, there's a big pressure to do pro bono work. So a lot of like, you can work in a private firm, but you're expected to do pro bono work, so you're doing public service. Or also asking interesting questions, like if you run a small business and you're giving people health insurance, you're not treating them like Walmart treats them, is that a form of public service? Which is something I wouldn't have considered, which is interesting.
Last question.
Oh, I feel a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Are public sector jobs undersubscribed?
What do you mean?
Like, a lot of this is saying, you know, like we want to make sure that people retain that emphasis on wanting to work in the public sector. Like, are there the jobs for that many people to want to work in the public sector right now? Or is it about making sure that we get the highest quality, best trained people to work in the public sector?
You know, it's interesting because that's outside the scope of my research. I didn't actually look at the dearth on a specific level. However, there's a lot of talk of, not my term, the retirement tsunami, where there's this huge problem where there's a lot of older people working at the federal level, not a lot of young people working at the federal level. And what hasn't happened yet, because people are retiring later, but is ultimately going to happen, is there going to be a wave of these retirements from the federal workforce, and there's not going to be able to replace them. So at least at the federal level, we know this is a pressing concern.
I would claim that phrase.
Retirement soon. Yeah, I was writing in my paper, and I was like, wow, this sounds ridiculous. But you know, maybe if we were more professional, people would want to work for us. What do I know? On that note.
Yes. You guys want to take like a 5-minute break or a restroom, snacks?
Yeah, I feel like a break, people. You want me to present while everyone's on break? Just, I'll pull it up though. Yeah. So like,
Do like we'll start at 7:15.
okay.
I know. That's crazy.
I went to the conference. Oh, nice. Oh, yeah. Oh, I just saw your conference. I live in the it's like Wells Fargo responsibility in Anaheim. Oh, dude. I was like, oh, how are you? Hi, I'm good. Nice to see you. June 19th. You went to present?
Really? Because of the Capstone or?
I just think there's like a lot of things happening in my life. This was you'll see it, you're gonna be like, but it was I went down around I had to bring it back in. Oh, because like trying to lower that and then like my junior to data science. But I like took as an elective. I don't know why I did that to myself. Yeah, okay. Alright, we're gonna reconvene, so everybody's done, so here until what? The hour. Make sure everything's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, next
Cool.
up. Hey, Joyce.
Awesome. Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Orlando and I am here to talk to you about the future of work and more specifically how technological advancements impact industrial land use in Philadelphia. So just for some background context to lay the groundwork, the future of work is becoming an increasingly common topic of conversation in planning and policy and is surrounded by like a lot of urgency. As we are moving into what is called the fourth industrial revolution, we are moving away from strictly digital technologies and kind of into this world where digital, biological, and physical technologies are all kind of combined into one. And so it's creating a lot of movement and shaking up modern industry as we know it. The definition of industrial is also changing, and so when people hear the term industrial, a lot of times they conjure up images like this, where it's smokestacks and pollution and noise and trucks and all of those types of things. But in this new revolution we're moving into, it's often more like laboratories and flex space and maker spaces that are included in this like new age of industry, in addition to distribution centers and larger spaces as well, but we're kind of moving away from what people once thought of as industrial into this new type of industry. The rise of advanced technology is also thought to have a heavy impact on the same areas that were once hit by manufacturing's decline. So there was a Brookings report called like the rise of robots or something scary like that. And this is particularly pressing for Philadelphia as a post-industrial city. So it's very essential that we learn from our history and ensure Philadelphia is prepared to adapt to this new age that we're moving into. Which brings us to the point of my capstone. PIDC, which is the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, kickstarted the future of work conversation last year in the summer by convening a group of city stakeholders for the first Future of Work Steering Committee meeting. And they had this goal in mind that we want to continue to position Philadelphia as a location of choice for industries as we're moving into the future and continue to attract, grow, and sustain whatever those industries might be. And then they identified two key objectives, one being looking at how Philadelphia can best plan for the way to utilize our industrial land assets throughout all of these technological changes, and also what technology is going to directly impact our workforce and what can we do about that. And that's where I come in. And I was so excited at the beginning of this. I decided to focus my capstone around the first objective, which is looking specifically at the industrial side of this. So not necessarily as much the workforce. There's a team of 5 students at Temple who are doing that as their capstone. And then the team of me was doing the first objective. So I reviewed some literature, gathered just industrial real estate market data, located land acreage for Philadelphia, spoke with some relevant stakeholders in the city, and ultimately used all of that to inform the recommendations that I will make. So as technology continues advancing, these new and innovative industries are also growing, which is having a significant impact on the way industrial land is used, both the actual land and the buildings that we're putting on top of it. And so these are three of the main industries that come up a lot in conversation and came up a lot in research. E-commerce distribution, obviously we all know what e-commerce is. As people are continuing to buy more things and spending their money online, e-commerce distribution industries are needing to relocate their spaces closer to the urban core, and so they want to move their facilities closer, need a lot of land and space to do it, and that's obviously impacting industrial land use and what we think about it. Biotech manufacturing, there are a lot of very intricate requirements for buildings that are used for biotech manufacturing, pharmaceutical research, that sort of thing. And then with the rise of the maker movement, there are a lot of new technologies, things like 3D printers, laser cutters that didn't exist several years ago, that are making it much easier now for small scale and medium sized makers to want to expand their industries. And so that is also having an impact on our land. So first, we have to consider what sort of inventory we're working with. When the last extensive study of Philadelphia's industrial lands was conducted in 2010, there were approximately 17,800 acres. For those of you like myself who don't know what an acre is, it's about the size of a football field. I had no idea. I was like, you could tell me that this building was the size of an acre, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. And now in 2019, we're seeing that we have about 17,000, close to 17,300 acres. So as you can see, over the years, it's been declining, and a lot of that is because some of the spaces that was zoned for industry has been rezoned into like residential or commercial real estate uses. And as we lose this industrially zoned land, that policymakers and planners should feel a sense of increasing urgency, because if we're losing continued land as we have demand rising for industrial spaces, there's going to be a point where we don't have anywhere to put the people who need to move into our city. So this is a map from 2017, so not too long ago, that takes a look at our industrial properties as far as acreage goes citywide. For those of you like myself who are directionally challenged, we are there in location of the city. There is a large concentration in the lower northeast. That's areas like Port Richmond, Kensington, Frankfurt area that have a diverse range of property sizes, which is good. So the property sizes are indicated by the size of the circle. Those smaller size properties are often older warehouses, which can be converted into new uses for things like e-commerce fulfillment centers. So think not like a huge distribution center for Amazon, but maybe like smaller scale retail companies that want to have fulfillment centers, or artisanal manufacturing studios for makers. Up in the upper northeast, there's a lot more land with high acreage, and then there's also properties with a lot of acreage too. So this lends itself to things like larger scale distribution centers, really big warehouses, multi-story warehouses, stuff like that. And then this lower Schuylkill area has a little bit less acreage, but the proximity to the University City Innovation District, the universities and hospitals, and Pennovation Center lends itself to more of like the biopharma tech. There's like a lot of different ways to term that industry. I'm just going to call it life sciences research. And so as we look at these different industries that are growing, they all have very specific and very numerous needs and wants, and these are some of the things that came up often in research and as I was talking to key stakeholders. Things that were as broad as just we want proximity to customers, we want high quality connectivity, to very specific things like we need proper ventilation because we're doing a lot of research with chemicals and we need to like be able to have that. So these are all of the things that we need to consider as a city when we're figuring out how we can best support industrial innovation with our lands. Also, Casey, give me a signal because I forgot to turn on my timer. So these are, here you'll see a few different examples of ways to use our industrial land assets to attract industries and jobs of the future. A couple of these are Philadelphia specific and a couple are examples from other cities. So multi-story warehouses is becoming a really popular trend in industrial development. This is an example from Brooklyn, somewhere in New York City. And there's actually only 3 multi-story warehouses currently in development in the United States. So Philadelphia has like an opportunity to really put themselves on the map with some of that area we saw in the upper northeast to build out distribution centers that look like this. The artisanal maker spaces, that is in Philadelphia. That's a studio called Macon Studios in Kensington, and so it's a collaborative co-working space that is used for people who are creating like anything from jewelry to furniture goods, and they can all kind of collaborate and use that together. Affordable, flexible lab space. This is a picture of the inside of Pennovation. So obviously, like, this is something that's really important for people who are in biopharma to have not only affordable space, but flexible, because they start small and they want to grow. That's like the whole point of what they're doing. And so having more flexible space is important. And then the last one is just like, in general, repurposed industrial sites. We are a city that used to have so much industry, and so we have a lot of opportunity to redevelop sites into fit any of these different industries in a build to suit way. That is an old property in, I don't remember the name of the town, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's the Bethlehem Steel. And then these are the ways in which the slide that we saw before with all of the aspects that people are looking for in these new industries would fall into these 4 different categories as we're redeveloping. I will skip over this for the sake of time, but basically the message here is, as a city, we need to be able to look at what the future of work is demanding, be prepared to offer it, have a very specific idea in mind of where in the city makes the most sense for that, and have a rationale behind like why it makes sense for us to prepare industrial land in that way. And so I have 3 recommendations coming out of all of this. The first one being that I think PIDC should put together a task force of relevant stakeholders. So there are so many people who are involved in the future of work conversation right now, but it's getting a little bit out of hand, and I think that there needs to be a focus in a way, because there are just meetings upon meetings where people pontificate about what the robots are doing to the future of work. And so putting together a diverse task force of people who have a real stake in the game for how industrial land needs to be reconfigured moving into the future. And then within that task force, commission updated land and market strategy. The last one was conducted in 2010. So even over the past decade, there were things that they could not have possibly anticipated being technologies to come about, and that needs to all be considered. And we also need an updated report of numbers. And then lastly, some sort of online database system to better track and manage our industrial land. It's very hard to track down updated numbers, and there is not a lot of good communication between stakeholders in different city agencies. And so having a way for everyone to kind of like go to one place will help the task force and people who are building out this strategy stay kind of focused on where we are at in terms of how much land we have left, where it's zoned, what we're as numbers continue to change. And then I have questions. Sarah.
You're kind of using like R and the city when you're talking about this industrial land. I'm just wondering, like, is it city owned? Is it privately owned? Like, what are the mechanisms controlling it?
This, you're talking about this?
Yeah, like.
So this is, that's part of why there needs to be a database, because I think it's all of the above. So as anyone who's like familiar with zoning or like the land bank or anything, there's like a lot of different entities, and it's kind of hard. I don't know specific numbers of who owns what because it isn't all in one place. So I was using our as like we as the city of Philadelphia and people who care about the industrial land. But yeah, this is from the Philadelphia Logistics and Distribution Report, so I assume that they were using their own personal numbers. Did that answer your question? Was I okay?
Are
Yes.
you hopeful and optimistic?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I think that the biggest concern that I have, or like the biggest challenge I see, is that there is not a streamlined communication and there is not a cohesive strategy. And I also haven't seen any examples of that as I was doing research in other cities either, of like, this is the one task force who has a very clear plan about what to do about industrial land with the future of work. So it is a very new topic. I am hopeful that because they are expressing interest in it, that over the next couple of years it will turn into something more organized. But the robots are coming fast. Yes.
And how, I was thinking too, right, I know, like, anybody who's lived in Philadelphia knows we did our best to bring Amazon in and failed. So thinking about, like, how could this report support, like, recruitment of, like, industries to come to Philly as well?
Well, I was thinking, that's kind of what I was thinking here. Obviously, I know it seems like I'm a developer, but I'm not. So someone who knows like where all of the different things should be, this would be a really good way to market and target specific companies or industries, being able to say to them, like, we have this whole lower school development. This is really where you would want to be. These are all the amenities we have. This is why you should be in this area. Or you're a distribution center. We have all of this land up in this northeast development. This is why you should be in Philadelphia. This is all the things that you have access to. So I think it would be good work in terms of like attracting workforce if we can like make this into a more marketing type strategy too. Yes.
Last question.
Yeah, so the one thing that struck me with this is going back to the first presentation, this almost seems like an area where someone like the CCP should be partnered with someone to think about how to put people that are coming out of that sort of place into these kinds of jobs. How could you work with people in places like kind of mentioned to try and place people?
Absolutely. And is it Carol at CCP? Carol DeFries? Is that her name? She's on the steering committee. So hopefully she will be more involved in that aspect of it, because there's so many different facets of future of work, which was a challenge at some point running down. Casey knows how many rabbit holes I went down. But because there's a whole education and workforce training component, there's a whole job attraction component, there's like an inclusive component of it, affordable housing, there's so many different things. So she's definitely at the table to consider how CCP and like education falls into all of this. Thanks.
Because Stephanie already explained what PIDC is.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you really did me a favor. I didn't bring my timer. Thank you, if you could. Great. All right, so I'm Helen Robb, and I'm here to talk about creating space for public transit and developments at NRG Station. So I'm going to run through a brief piece of background, some findings and recommendations, and then some next steps. Background. So why am I actually here? I work on behalf of the Navy Yard, which is an organization, a sub-organization of PIDC. We have been tasked with developing the former Philadelphia Naval Yard. The Navy Yard has a significant transportation need. It's one of the most successful economic development sites in the country. It was handed to PIDC eventually in 2006, and from there we've developed over 13,500 jobs in 160 companies. It's famous for having a real variety of organizations. We have beautiful organizations like Urban that share beautiful campuses with the sites, as well as really significant high-tech companies in energy and defense. But all of that success means that there is some structural issues around transportation, and that's where I was employed by PIDC to think about how we could structure transit in the future to make sure that we had sustainable, high-capacity transit. So at the moment, 80% of employees drive a single occupancy vehicle, or a car, as we know it in the real world, to the Navy Yard every day. With projected job growth at the Navy Yard, that would mean 25,000 vehicles every day trying to squeeze through the Navy Yard gates by 2030. Right now, 40% of vehicles wait for over 5 minutes at the gate on entrance and exit from the Navy Yard. And for over 20% of drivers, it takes 5 minutes to find parking. So we have a capacity issue. I was brought in to think about this and look at our transit strategy. So I came up with 3 goals. First, increasing sustainability. Right now we have that many cars. It means that we also have that many cars polluting right outside of our gate, especially with the weights that are involved. The second is to build capacity, make sure that we have somewhere to put those 25,000 cars, or rather the people who would have been driving them. And finally, reduce roadblocks and pain points. Make sure that that drive is smoother, that journey is smoother throughout the whole transit organization. So the task that I want to talk to you about today, which is one subset of that project, is that increasing public transportation ridership to the Navy Yard will help to achieve all 3 of those goals. But right now, why aren't people using public transit to get to the Navy Yard? There are a whole bundle of reasons, but the most important one is that survey respondents say that they don't use public transit because it takes too long to get to the Navy Yard. And then we have a big blocker right before the Navy Yard. You travel all the way down Broad Street, and then you get to NRG station, and you have at least a 10-minute wait to get a shuttle that takes you down into your actual place of work. And what's more, because the NRG station is pretty much alongside a parking lot and a 4-lane road, you're just sat in the middle of what feels like a transit dead end. And that can cause up to a 33% increase in perceived wait time. So not only is your journey longer, your journey feels much longer. Developing that space would create a major opportunity. 20% of drivers say that they sometimes use public transit when they have the time. So there's a group of people there that we could capture and get out of their cars quickly and get into public transit. 80% of transit users right now say that if there were additional amenities, they would use them. So there's an opportunity from a business perspective. People are already there and ready to use any future development. And then we can think about what we would want to aim for from development. So I'm going to talk about these goals more, but I wanted to introduce them all really quickly. So we would be aiming for things to be imageable. That means that you can picture them in your mind. When I say energy station, you picture it and it looks beautiful and not like a parking lot. Secondly, enclosed. That means that you feel kind of safe in the space. You feel like there are edges to it. You're not just out there on your own. Third, it's human scale. There's signage, there's ways to see your way around, and it feels like it's directed towards pedestrians, not towards drivers. It's transparent. That means that you can see beyond your edges, your safe enclosed edges. You can still see out of them. It's complex. That means there's multiple things to look at. You're not just staring at one blank wall. It's coherent. So within those multiple things, you don't just have a medieval church next to a futuristic stadium. It's legible. That means that you can see the ways between places and understand how it's laid out. And then finally, that it's linked. You can tell that there are other places to go outside of this. It's a really quick run through, but those are the things that one could aim for when developing that space. And it's 13.5 thousand square feet, so there's a significant opportunity there to do something that feels like a positive part of your commute and not like an inconvenience. So how do we actually do that? Well, I believe that there are 3 things that we would have to do that. First, we'd have to make it comfortable. That starts to address making it human scale, making it enclosed, making it transparent, make you feel safe there. Second, you'd have to keep it engaging. Make it complex, make it imageable, make it feel multi-use and like there's a bunch of stuff going on that I could do during my 10-minute wait. Make it feel less like a 13-minute wait, more like a 5-minute wait. Then finally, be informative. Give you things that you can understand how to get to different places, you can understand how it's laid out. That one's particularly important. I put it at the end because it kind of fit with the flow, but it's particularly important because right now if you ask somebody how far NRG station is from the Navy Yard, they'll say miles. It's a 10-minute walk, but people don't know that because it's not legible. They can't tell, it doesn't feel linked. So I'm going to dive into each of these and talk about the kind of implementable, actionable things that we could do in each of these spaces that would help to achieve those goals. So make it comfortable. There are 3 things that we can do to make that space comfortable, and they're all fairly low budget. The first is providing seating, the second shelter, and then the third some greenery and human scale. In terms of seating, we have to have different options. We can't just have one bench at the bus stop, although that would be an improvement on what we have today. We also have to have pieces that feel playful and movable. And the picture here is a really fun example from Baltimore where they used public art to also create an amenity, create somewhere to sit, create somewhere for kids to play, and I'm sure for parents to yell at kids for playing. The second is to think about shelter. Shelter isn't just a bus shelter, it also needs to be weatherproof. Given that Philadelphia's weather varies so wildly across the course of the year, if you're encouraging people to use public transit and have a 5-minute to 10-minute wait outside for a shuttle, you have to make sure that that's comfortable and safe. So that can include having air-conditioned areas or also having heated areas in the winter. And this is an example from Sweden where they actually have a mood light that exists there. It's supposed to help inject some light into your day. And then finally, human scale. Adding some activity at the edges in the form of greenery helps people to feel safer, feel like the space is more created for people. Second, keep it engaging. There are 2 things in this. The first is incorporating art and play, and the second is building and commercial activities. In incorporating art and play, we're in a huge advantage here in Philadelphia. We already have a huge culture of incorporating art into everyday mundane spaces. But moving some of that towards the station will help to make it feel engaging, break up the monotony of some of the views that come from there. And there are a couple of organizations that have done really well and really great work to create play in these places as well. So that top picture is from Kaboom, which is an organization that injects play into parts of your life. And then the second is from the Department of Play in Boston. It's a non-profit, not a department. I was really upset about that. Department of Play in Boston, they install like various major installations that people can use to kind of break up their day, enjoy public spaces. All of that helps to kind of make the space feel more like an interesting place to be and somewhere that you would want to spend 10 minutes on your commute. And then building commercial opportunities. 80% of people said they were interested in using amenities, and we particularly suggested, what about a coffee shop? People would love to have a coffee shop. Right now, if you're on your way to the Navy Yard, you don't pass a coffee shop your whole time unless you're going to the urban campus. So this would fill a need. It could postpone a part of your commute if you were planning on getting one beforehand, and it would also use up some of that time that you're waiting for your shuttle. Finally, be informative. This comes in 3 forms, and they're all equally important. The first is real-time information. Right now, you don't know whether your shuttle is going to come in 1 minute or 10 minutes. So you don't really know how to make the decision about what mode of transit you're going to use. So the Indigo bikes that are at the NRG station just sit unused when it could be a much faster way for you to get to your end destination. So if we had better live transit information, it would help to engage people in a conversation about their mode of transit. It would also give people a chance to try out new amenities. You don't want to go to a coffee shop if you think that your bus might come in a minute, but if you know it's 10, you've got time for a latte. Second, signage and directions. This is all about making sure that there's clear, safe pedestrian and bike signage to the Navy Yard. Fewer than half the people that we surveyed said that they felt comfortable and knew the safe way to get from NRG station to the Navy Yard by foot or bike. That's ridiculous. It takes 2 street crossings and you can get there, but right now there isn't anybody telling people that. So we can insert fairly low-cost signage that will help people to do that. And if we add timings, that also helps to that feeling of connection and linkage. And then finally, community information. Adding notices about Navy Yard events and opportunities to explore helps people to feel connected to the space that they're in. And expanding that to the other communities that use NRG Station makes it feel like you're an important part of Philadelphia rather than the end of a transit line. So cognizant of the time, quickly, implementation of this requires the support of diverse groups. I work for PIDC and I care a lot about the employees at the Navy Yard, but they're not the only constituents here. There are 4 big groups that we need to engage with. First is community groups. Packer Park Community Association is a formidable and wonderful place. We need to get them on board as quickly as possible and make sure that their feedback is included within any final plans. Friends of the Park is an organization for FDR Park. They are similarly passionate. They're in the process of doing a strategic plan at the moment, so making sure that they're involved and included in any plans that go ahead. Stadium representatives, they have thousands of people coming to events, a quarter of whom use public transportation to get to the stadiums and to NRG station. And then finally, employees of the Navy Yard. So far, we've engaged them in a pre-planned survey to understand what they were interested in, what their pain points were, but then putting this back in front of them, making sure that we had their perspectives. So the next steps, first is to design. Right now, this is a prototype set of things that we could include, but we need to build an actual design, something that shows the triangulation between each of these elements that would make it a really fun, usable space and an interesting part of your day. Designing that will help to build a shared vision. Secondly, talking to community and stakeholder leaders to make sure that they're connected and they can kind of rally their troops behind this idea. Third is engaging in a community forum, actually getting the feedback of all members of the community, giving people a chance to respond to this. And then finally, funding, modeling out the precise costs of all of these things. Right now we have back of the envelope estimates, but going into the detail of it and identifying funders for each part. Questions?
Great. Hold on. I noticed one of the groups that did not see the partner is SEPTA. Is there a reason why you should, why you did not list them as a partner, and why yes or no?
So they are an interesting partner because they have a role in that the NRG station is obviously a key station for them, but in terms of attracting people to the station, I think they can be helpful in terms of forming linkages, but we want to make sure that that station is serving the community around it, and the space that's within there isn't owned by SEPTA, it's currently public land. So making sure that the community's voice is first and foremost, and then SEPTA can be involved later, although SEPTA would probably disagree with that. So I hope nobody from SEPTA is in the room. I will include them in my final write-up.
So it is public land around the station?
Yeah.
Not belonging to the parks either?
No, it's city land right now. There's actually, cause there's a kind of question because it doesn't have an address. So it's public land by proxy. The car park that's immediately alongside it, Comcast has an option over, and then the actual station heads belong to SEPTA. So one of the hardest parts of this project was trying to trace down to whom that land belonged. So trying to figure that out at the moment. Yeah.
I had a question about your data collection. You talk about like it takes 5 minutes to park, and then you also talk about like the perceived time. And I know that when I'm looking for a parking spot, 5 minutes feels like 10. So I was wondering, like, did you go out and time these things, or was it mostly just like survey respondents and you actually accept that it's 5, it's 5?
It was mostly survey respondents. So we asked everybody. We conducted a survey of every Navy Yard employee, offering them a free meal for their team at one of the Navy Yard restaurants. So we got 350 people to respond, and we asked them, in that particular example, we said, how long does it take you on average to find a parking space? And then filtered through those. We tended to, if somebody gave a range, lowball it because of that effect. But the increased perception of waiting time figure, the 33%, applied to the 10 minutes on the shuttle. The 10 minutes on the shuttle is a scheduling, and then the 33% came out of a paper I would have to find the citation for, that looked at kind of all the different factors that layered into waiting time perceptions. And that was actually the factor that only weighed into being around traffic and cars. There are other factors around pollution and whether you feel like the area is safe and clean that may make it feel actually further if you had a less charitable view of NRG station.
Last question? I was gonna ask, is the biggest hurdle the financial aspect of it, or is there something else that's gonna like prohibit this from being done? 'Cause it seems like so many of the things you suggested should be like so easy to implement, but if it's the financial aspect, like that's always big.
It's actually not the financial aspect. I can put a quick cost level next to the 8 things that I suggested. And most of them are fairly low cost, and the ones that are higher cost actually have higher chance of return in the future. So for example, creating a business space there, we might have to subsidize the creation of the real estate for it, but other such restaurants and cafes run at a profit, albeit fairly small. The issue is more likely to be gathering all the stakeholders together and getting everybody to agree on at least the starting point of a plan or whom can be the lead developer for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Rothenberg, and my capstone project is on improving residential placement for Philadelphia youth in the child welfare, juvenile justice, and mental health systems. So before I get started, I know when I first started this project, the term youth residential placement was kind of a wonky term. I wasn't totally sure what it meant. So just by show of hands, who in the room is confident that they know what youth residential placement means? Okay, a couple hands, but a lot of us aren't totally sure. So I wanted to start with just a really clear definition. So youth residential placement refers to facilities that offer 24/7 supervision, care, and treatment for youth who have been removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, behavior that might be considered delinquent, mental health issues, substance use disorders, and or behavioral problems. These facilities are entrusted with the care of youth and supporting their development, but unfortunately, they don't always live up to these expectations. So I wanted to start also with a story that's been in the news recently that sort of helps to paint a picture of why this issue is so important. So back in February, the Philadelphia Inquirer published an investigative report of a residential placement facility called Glen Mills, which serves boys in the juvenile justice system. And what they found was that there had been decades of abuse happening at this facility. The administration knew about it, but did nothing. And when youth and families tried to report the abuse that they were experiencing, they were silenced. So once this story came out in the Inquirer, Philadelphia immediately pulled all of their youth that were at this facility out of it, and earlier this month the state shut it down. But what's interesting about this example is that this institution was viewed as sort of a really strong national model for a reform school. It had a gorgeous campus, it had a really strong athletic program, it yielded a lot of NFL recruits, but underneath that glossy exterior there was a lot of abuse going on. And unfortunately, those types of issues are not unique to Glen Mills. There is a lot of evidence that youth residential placement facilities actually harm youth more than help them. So we know from a lot of studies that youth in placement are more likely to experience physical and sexual abuse while in care. Certainly that's what happened at Glen Mills. They're also likely to test below or far below average in English and math, so they're having worse educational outcomes. They're more likely to drop out of high school, and they're also more likely to be arrested. These are all not the outcomes that we want to see, obviously, from these types of facilities. So to address these very serious problems, Philadelphia put together a youth residential placement task force. It was authorized by City Council and started meeting back in the fall, so before the Glen Mills story broke. And their goals are really twofold. Number one, they're looking to reduce the use of residential placement so that youth can remain with their families and communities wherever possible, because we know that that's what supports the best outcomes for youth when they can stay with their families where they belong. The second goal of the task force is to ensure that youth who do enter residential facilities are receiving high quality services and care that promote their health, safety, education, and well-being. So where do I fit into this? The goal of my capstone is to inform the work of the task force and contribute to its final report through both an analysis of the current residential placement landscape in Philadelphia and also by identifying national best practices and promising models. And I should also add, I've been attending all of the task force meetings since it began, and part of my analysis involved taking data directly from the Philadelphia Department of Human Services and Community Behavioral Health, who oversee a lot of the residential placements in Philadelphia, and then also looking just at academic literature in general on best practices. So first up, I want to talk about the landscape in Philadelphia. And residential placement is a complex issue involving multiple systems. So the main avenues that youth enter into residential placement are through the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, and the mental health system. But as you can see here in this Venn diagram, youth are not necessarily only in one system. They might be in two systems, they might be in all three. So for instance, a youth who's in foster care through the child welfare system, if they have a severe mental health issue and they need to enter into a psychiatric residential treatment program for that, then they're in the child welfare and mental health systems. Likewise, if there's a youth in foster care who is found guilty of committing a crime, they may go to a residential placement for that reason, and then they're in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems. What we do know is that across all three of these systems, there are too many youth in placement. It's not, like I talked about before, it's not good for youth to be in placement unless they really have to be. It should be the option of last resort. But we see across these three systems, there are about 615 youth in the child welfare system who are in residential placement, 515 in the juvenile justice system and 305 in the mental health system. We can't just add those three numbers up to get a total count of the number of youth in placement because there's some overlap between those numbers, but that is something that DHS and CBH here in Philly are working on matching those numbers, and that'll be available in the final report that comes out later this year. And then really quickly, I want to run through the common reasons that youth enter placement. So in the child welfare system, youth might be removed from their homes due to issues of abuse or neglect, or if their caretakers are unable to continue caring for them because of things like illness that come up, they may bring them to the child welfare system. And then if there aren't enough available foster homes or kinship care options, which means family members in the community who can care for them, they might go to a residential placement facility. In the juvenile justice system, youth are often court-ordered into placement as a result of what's considered to be delinquent behavior. And then in the mental health system, youth enter into psychological residential placement facilities because they have a mental health condition that requires active treatment in a clinical environment. So in terms of demographics of who's in placement, we see a really clear racial trend across all the three different types of placement where Black youth are severely overrepresented. Close to 80% of youth in residential placement are Black youth, and what that tells us is that this is really a racial justice issue. Next, when we look at gender, we see that across the different systems, there are more boys than girls in placement, but it really varies based on which system you're looking at. So as you can see here, in the juvenile justice system, an overwhelming number of youth are boys, that's 93%. In child welfare, it's a little bit more equal, 54% are boys. One caveat I want to add here is that there's no data available on youth of other genders, so non-binary youth, we don't know how many are in the system. I wanted to give an overview of the types of residential placement facilities. It's a pretty complex system. There are lots of different types of facilities. 3 minutes? Okay. Gonna speed things up. So real quick, these are the different types of placement. We know that youth across all these different types of placement are there too long. The recommended length of stay is 3 to 6 months. In Philadelphia, the average is 7.5 to 12.7. Real quick, the challenges that youth face while in care that are common. These are all things that are specific to Philadelphia that have come through in reports and youth's testimonies. So youth are facing physical, sexual, and verbal abuse on a regular basis from both staff and peers. Inappropriate use of restraint, which is related to abuse but deserves to be its own category because that's an issue of staff not being well trained enough in de-escalation tactics and are instead using physical restraints that harm youth both physically and psychologically. Inadequate education, which is why youth are more likely to drop out of school. Often they need to repeat grades. They're not getting education that's on grade level. Special education needs are not being addressed. Separation from family and community is really damaging to a young person. The decision to remove them from their community is a life-altering decision, and when those ties are severed, it has a really negative impact on their lives. And then finally, for poor physical living conditions, these facilities sometimes are well-maintained, sometimes aren't, so that can be an issue. Best practices in residential placement. In my capstone, I provide a pretty big overview of the academic literature on this subject, but for the purpose of this presentation, I just wanted to pull out 2 really specific case studies. So a great example of a system that has reformed their child welfare and mental health systems for youth is the New Jersey Children's System of Care, which was established in 2001. It's designed to reduce the use of residential placement through behavioral health interventions that are delivered in the community so that youth don't need to go into placement. It provides a continuum of treatment services that are available to all children statewide, and families play a really big role. They drive the individual care planning process for youth, and there's a family-led organization that provides resources to families in the process. going to skip over their results because I'm running out of time. In the juvenile justice side of things, the New York City Close to Home initiative is a really stellar example of how to do this work well. Their system is designed to keep youth within their home communities and near their families. Youth are housed in small family-like residences in New York City with approximately 6 to 10 other youth, as opposed to being sent upstate in large institutional facilities that are what you think of when you think of incarceration. And they use really great evidence-based practices, extensive oversight and monitoring of the residences, and then they also have regular family contact and educational continuity in the New York City public school system, thanks to being in their communities that they're from. Again, lots of great results I'm going to skip over. So the key takeaways from this project that are for the task force in Philadelphia to consider as they move forward with their recommendations, prepare to publish them later this year. What we should remember about the landscape in Philadelphia is that the work of the task force here is ambitious and it's also necessary. So one thing that I found looking at best practices are that residential placement really needs to be viewed as the option of last resort, and if there's another option, youth should not be sent to residential placement because it's harmful. Care that's provided in placement must be trauma-informed, it must be evidence-based, and there must be strong administrative oversight to ensure quality. The goal of placement should be to get youth home as soon as possible. And finally, family must be engaged at every step, because we know that when the family is doing well, that is critical to the youth doing well as well. Thank you.
Do you have any insight into what's driving the length of stay, the average being longer than it would ideally be in the different systems?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, and I think that's something that the task force is going to look into a lot more for that final report that's going to be coming out in September. I think it's just generally like needing to reorient the system around this knowledge that we have that placement is not the best option for youth, and the goal really has to be to get them out as soon as possible, and that's not how the system functions right now necessarily. Yeah.
This is maybe too specific of a question, but I was listening to a podcast that talked about a woman whose son had a lot of mental health issues, and the only way she could afford to get help was if she signed over her guardianship and made him a ward of the state, because she couldn't afford the facility that he needed.
Yeah.
Is part of the task force working as much as we can with local hospitals and insurance companies to try to make sure that mental health is easier accessible to people who have limited financial means?
I think that specific issue hasn't been discussed at the task force meetings that I've been to, but the New Jersey example that I talked about, the impetus for their reform was actually that very reason, that in their mental health system, parents had to give up their parental rights of their children in order to get the care that they needed. I haven't heard as much of that locally in Philadelphia, but I do know that looking at the New Jersey model, they provide mental health interventions in the community to all children across the state regardless of income level, and it's really made a difference.
The slide that you had for those youth that are in care by race, is that the percentage of the total population, for example, like Latinx youth that are in care, or is the percentage of the total youth in care that are Latinx?
It's the second, the percentage of the total youth in care who are Latinx. I originally had this as a pie chart, but it was a little bit confusing, so I made it into a bar, but yeah. Yep.
I noticed that all of your data is from September, so I was wondering like at what regularity the data is updated, and do you feel that it gets updated enough to really learn if you have an impact, if the ideal length of time is 3 to 6 months and it's been 6 months since it's been updated?
Yeah, so DHS and CBH both have data teams that are looking at this data constantly, but the data that I was given for this project was a point-in-time estimate as of September 30th, of last year, and that's because they had to get the data like looking the same way and able to be put into the same chart and all of that. So that is something that they're working on as part of the task force, having more, regular like matching their data, and then also in the final report, those numbers will be updated. This is just what I was working with for my project.
Thank you. Three more to go, so Bernadette, and then we'll conclude with Molly. We're running a little over, but still doing it.
Hi everyone, I'm Bernadette Stanko. I'm a second year executive MPA student and I will also be graduating in a couple of weeks. I teamed up with the Fels Lab to work on Reentry USA, which is a website/database that aims to give hope and information to the currently incarcerated and the formerly incarcerated, who from this point I will be calling returning citizens. The organization and the website was started by Rich Jacobs. He's a former probation officer and is currently working as a prison teacher at the SCI Phoenix Project, which was formerly Greater for Prison. His Reentry USA is his pet project, and he's hoping to create like one sort of, he called it Zillow.com, that would give returning citizens and the current incarcerated all the information they would need to exit prison and be able to find housing and employment opportunities. This website is very new, it's just started, and I do have a link to it that I may show later, but it's still a little rough, so it might not be the best. While he's working on the technology aspect of it, I decided to help him with a marketing plan. So why are we doing this right now? What is the issue? According to the National Reentry and Resource Center, 2.2 million people were held in federal, state, and local prisons in the country. 95% of that 2.2 million will be released back into the community at some point. In 2005, a study that followed about 400,000 people released from prison in 30 states. Of that population, 67.8% were rearrested in 3 years. 76.6% were rearrested within 5 years. Now, this study was done in 2005. Things have changed. In a lot of places, things have gotten a lot better, but it doesn't paint a really great picture, sorry. Of the population in prison, only about half have a high school diploma or GED, according to an article from the National Employee Law Project. It's especially hard for not as well educated women to find jobs, because a lot of the jobs that uneducated women tend to take are house cleaning and child services, and those all require criminal background checks, whereas men can do construction and workhouse and building, so job training is a big part of it. Another key issue to this is that 55% of those in prison have children, so this is a holistic family issue. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that when a parent is in prison, it drastically affects a child's life. So there is a lot of hope. Criminal justice reform is really popular in the news right now. It has been mentioned by everyone from President Obama to Meek Mill to President Trump. Everyone's talking about it. In December, President Trump passed the First Step Act. It only affected the federal prison population, which is about 181,000 people. Of the 2.1 million that are in jail right now, but as the name says, it's a good first step. It may encourage a lot of state and local municipalities to start passing laws for criminal justice reform and to get people back in the community. And then on a more local level, Philadelphia has made its own first steps to lowering the incarcerated population. According to Philly.gov, the Philadelphia has created a re-entry coalition in 2015 that wanted to reduce its recidivism rates from 33.9% to 25.3%. On another topic, I was talking to someone who worked in the Philadelphia budget office, Sabrina Maynard, And she has said that the city has exceeded its goals, so this task force has worked and less people are going into prison than they were before, and it has really helped our budget numbers. So, how can reentry help? Reentry USA wants to be the website that people go to. Wants to help citizens in need stay out of prison, but first it needs to build name recognition and it needs to build trust in the community. So that's sort of where I step in with the marketing plan. So what is the first step of the marketing plan? First step of the marketing plan is to have a Facebook and a Twitter. As you can see, they use the same pictures for both, which gives continuity. I did have the links here, but they didn't seem to cross over. The problem with these current websites, at least for the Twitter, is there's a bunch of tweets with links to the website, but there's not a lot of pictures, not a lot of engagement. And for the Facebook, they use the reentry logo for all the pictures with stories underneath that go to the website where they should be using more engaging pictures. So, what are the next steps? So, setup is good, but we need to start taking it to the next steps. So, the first part of the next steps is that you need to be tweeting at least 3 times a day. According to, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she presented a long discussion on social media for marketing called Social Media for Nonprofits. You should be retweeting organizations you follow, you should be engaging with people, and then you should be promoting your own website. A lot of this would be 1/3 promoting nonprofit, 1/3 sharing industry ideas, and 1/3 personal brand and personal engagement. You can also use hashtags, and again, try to be good with engagement. Just be careful with hashtags and engagement because this is a very sensitive issue and you don't want to make light of a serious issue. So here are some good examples of ways that you can tweet and use Facebook that, oh, the link showed up. That's all right. Good Project Home and Phil Abundance have really big presence in the Philadelphia community. Reentry USA would like to get there at one point while they're just starting. Project Home is here retweeting Valley Youth House. They also retweet the city of Philadelphia, which is sort of retweeting both friends and partners and also your industry partners. And then Phil Abundance is making great use of the album and just great quality pictures. They look engaging. They have people that are there that seem happy. There's a lot of colors. So for Facebook and the albums, make sure your album's covers and pictures are interesting. Tag people in the album and make sure that you sort of stagger out where your posts are going to be because it doesn't have to be as frequent as Twitter, as you guys all know. Also, you can pin an album for 7 days. So if you do something super engaging in your company, make sure you take a bunch of pictures and pin that there. So what's the next step? The next step would be promoting tweets and Facebooks and buying them. So it's not crazy expensive to do this. It really depends on what your budget is and what you want to do. So yeah, $2,500 probably isn't great for an organization just starting out. But you can put, a couple hundred in there and then see how that works and then slowly grow as you get more funders. And then with Facebook, they say that most posts should start around $30 and see where that goes. And then again, as you grow, see what happens there and you can put more there. The reason why Facebook is so incredibly important to have promoted posts is because the algorithms are constantly changing and they're trying to get more funders and more people involved that way. Part 3 of the marketing plan is partnerships. Again, Project Home and Phil Abundance and the Boys and Girls Club are all here. Project Home partnered with Wawa, Phil Abundance partnered with the Phillies, and then the Boys and Girls Club of America partnered with Microsoft. These are great to show that how different stages and how big or small your organization is will depend on how big and small your partners are. For more smaller scale projects, the Lutheran Settlement House in Fishtown, Philadelphia, they partner with Cake Life, which is a local business. They partner with the Penn Treaty Park, which is also a local nonprofit, and sort of hospitals. I know the Laurel House in Montgomery County partners with the Preston and Steve Show. So you can sort of partner with nonprofits or businesses, whatever works for your organization. It's very important to make sure, though, that your partners match your ethics. A lot of times people will try to partner with something that is sneaky behind the scenes or is going to have going through bad PR, and that can really color how it affects your organization. So something that is fairly generic but also, you know, pretty popular, like Wawa, is a great partnership. I personally love the Philly, so I think that's great too. But again, start off small if your organization is small, and then grow to bigger partners, because you'll both get stuff out of that. And then the phase 4 of my marketing plan is to go to traditional marketing. Radio and TV are incredibly helpful. They're also incredibly expensive. So that may be where you end up, but it's not where you want to start, because you don't want to spend that money if you don't have to. Flyers and word of mouth are a great way. They will sort of tie into the social media market, especially with with both of them. When you use flyers, try to talk to the community centers or the churches or wherever you're putting them there, because people who are returning citizens may not have access to computers, or they may be more suspicious of typical marketing. So if you can have a librarian where if somebody sees a flyer, come up to it and then sort of chat with them about it, that may help get them more engaged. It's also important to have flyers that are colorful, useful, but also pretty simple. Blood drive's great. Just put your website there. The logo's clear. Same thing with Fill Abundance. So those are good examples of that. So what are my recommendations for the future? I was originally supposed to do a podcast for this. It's part of the whole plan. They would love to have a podcast. It's taken some time with the technology aspect of it, but the great thing about a podcast is that you can tell stories of returning citizens, which would be its main focus, successful returning citizens that are doing great things in the community, so that formerly incarcerated people have hope, or current incarcerated people can listen to the podcast and know what their first steps need to be when they are released from prison. It will also humanize the population to get more community members to be less distrustful of returning citizens and also more engaged in their stories. I think because you need to tweet 3 times a day and be careful of the pictures that you're going to put on Facebook, my next recommendation is to hire a social media marketing employee. I would suggest an intern or part-time. That would be, $10 an hour at first, just so that they can edit everything and sort of put it all together. And then my third is that you need to figure out how you're going to pay for this. I think they should apply for a grant, which would be the JMK Innovation Prize, which would be $175,000, which can pay for editing and podcast information. It will also go to the social media intern and maybe throw some money towards either updating the website better, or Rich Jacobs can use it to pay for his own salary if he wants to do this full time. And that is that. Thank you very much. I didn't see that. I don't know. It has to do with sort of the scale, I think, as to is it more local? Like, do you only need a certain amount of people to see it, or do you want this to be a national thing to see? But that is something I can look into, is how many. They do have how many people will see a tweet versus it, or how often it'll get bumped up to the timeline. But a lot of the large costs for Twitter have to do with they scale it from just how it pops onto your timeline to how many people engage with it. So that's why it can be so much.
So it's an interesting strategy, but is the goal to try and, because the kinds of people who use Twitter are very different, right? That's it's super, everything we know about them is the people who use Twitter are fundamentally different than anyone else in the population. Much younger, much better educated, much more politically informed, much more politically extreme. So is it about attracting funders? Is it about attracting volunteers? Or is it about trying to get this information out to people who are themselves family members of, or connected to previously incarcerated citizens?
The idea is a little bit of both. I think at first it is to get to returning citizens so that they know they can come here, but the other idea was sort of that highly educated part is that we would like people who would employ them and give them housing opportunities and people who work in those nonprofits. So we want them to know that they can post their opportunities on the website. And then we use the other marketing like Facebook and word of mouth to get returning citizens to use the website.
This is like maybe like breaking the fourth wall sort of question, but it seems sometimes like our role as students and consultants and employees is to work with like clients who have realistic expectations and like realistic sort of goals in mind. And it seems like a really important idea and really essential. Did you get a sense that your client had a realistic expectation for where they wanted to go? So when you, from start to finish, were you like, this is, looks like I'm glad to help, or this person has such ambitious vision that make it happen seems really difficult to do?
I think the vision is possible and great. I think the timeline is maybe a little unrealistic. I think my client thinks that this will all, once he gets the website to be where he wants it to be, he'll just throw a couple tweets and a couple Facebook posts, and since it's a good idea, it'll get picked up. I don't think he has any idea of how many even years it can take to build name recognition on something like this.
Can you show us the website?
Yeah.
And how would you go about compiling the resources to feed the website?
So I think first, since he knows so many people, since he has been an advocate for this, is I would reach out to my friends in the local Philadelphia area and ask them if they would put their resources on this website, and then slowly build it from Philly area to broader. So this is it. And then like there's not a ton. I'm trying to get a load. So like this isn't the idea to, tell people to go to monster.com or whatever for job opportunities. You sort of want something where it's all there and they can just sort of search like philly.gov or something, but wider. Yeah.
Could you do a general scan of similar companies or apps, kind of services that Reentry USA would consider as competition, or that you can like kind of copy off of?
So there's not a particular, as far as I know, there's not an app of this scale where the goal is. He wants it to be a nationwide database that people can just sort of find all the information that they need. A lot of what's out there right now is that you can go to nonprofits and they can team you up with people, but it's not that easy to just search jobs. Like it would be more job training and going to nonprofits that would then connect you with a person who would then connect you to more jobs. So he sort of wants it to be like, you can go to an employee, you can go to this website, type in what kind of job you want, whether it's construction, or if you want to be, like you had job training for carpentry in school, and you can put that in there, and then you sort of be able to find it.
Thank you, Bernadette.
Hang out?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want. Give us a little round.
Very nice.
Thanks. I don't know how to use it because I don't feel so out of my generation. How do
Can
you
you go down to the bottom and see where there's the scale?
This
Right
is
there, yeah.
nailed it. Totally culturally cool. All right.
Speaking of.
Yeah. So, I'm Molly, and just to start, I worked with a single organization, but because the focus of my project was on process and culture that could be expanded towards multiple organizations, I do touch on my findings and my tools that I use with one organization, but I don't focus primarily on them. Also, I included my instruments and my findings in links, but in the value of your time, I'm going to skip them, and if you're interested or have questions about looking at them afterwards, then I'm happy to revisit them. So, we're talking about how to implement a data culture in 4 mostly easy steps. So first we want to talk about what is a data-informed culture. So there's 4 stages of a data organization. Data ignorant, where people don't collect meaningful information. Data reactive, where they collect information but it's not intentional or strategic, and so a lot of times you look at an organization that's like yours and say, what are they collecting? And then you collect that without really looking at, like, does this align with our goals? There's data driven, which actually, like, a lot of people hold up as the gold standard, and it's a really sophisticated data method. They value data and they have a lot of systems and processes, but they don't look at the context around data. So a lot of times they're missing things even though they're collecting relevant data. Finally, there's data informed. So you're looking at the data, you have systems in place to ensure its sustainability, but also you're looking at why the data is like that so you can be making really solid and valuable decisions. There's 3 questions every organization wants to know. 1, how much did it cost? 2, how much did it do? 3, how much did it matter? So, data-informed organizations can answer all of these questions, not just internally, but also for external stakeholders. So that's, I mean, if you don't care about data for any other reason, it's so that you can communicate, hey, the things that we do, people actually give a crap about. So, there are 4 key steps to data-informed culture, and these are the things that everyone needs to know if they want to have a really solid infrastructure. The first is data collection. So finding the indicators that you need, making the instruments that are, the methodologies that are relevant. You want to interpret data in ways that are easy to understand and really get to the core of what's saying. So it's not just data, it's insights. When you say data acceptance, it's looking at data-driven, data-informed decision-making. So are you taking the data and actually turning it into action? And then data integration, and are you creating systems that sustain this? And are you creating budgeting and allocating time and resources towards continuing to have a data culture? I work with the Arts and Business Council of Greater Philadelphia, just to give you a little background. So their mission is to catalyze a new framework to innovate by investing and connecting the creative economy to the business economy through programs that foster an immersive exchange. They're a branch of the Chamber of Commerce, so a lot of what they're doing is trying to promote Philadelphia's larger economy. There's 4 main brackets of their work. They have leadership training, military services, creative placemaking, and then events and awards. So a little bit of project background. When I stepped in, they had a new executive director, Marquita Morris-Lewis, who had started in November. And when she stepped in, she wanted to know more about the organization, the operations, and the programs, which really highlighted to the other employees and the other leadership that a lot of their processes in data collection had been based on institutional knowledge instead of systemic and strategic planning. And so they do some evaluation, and they do have instruments, and actually, like, they collect data, they visit it pretty regularly, which is a lot more than you could say for a lot of organizations. Who just do it once a year, or when funding comes up or someone asks a question that they have to do a report on. It just isn't where they want it to be just yet, and so they're figuring out how can we really make this something that we can be aligned with and really defend as we're going forward. So when I first started, before we got to step 1 of data collection, we defined the scope of the project. So I got with each organizational leader, and I asked them, what does success look like for the program and for data collection? What kind of internal and external barriers stand in the way of us creating that success? And then who needs to be engaged in surmounting these obstacles? Where are you currently with your strategizing, your data collection and analysis, and your use, and where do you want to be when we end this? So after we had those conversations, we got to 4 primary purposes of our data collection. They wanted to maintain alignment across the organization so everyone was moving in the same direction towards the same goals. They wanted to understand their stakeholders' needs, values, and satisfaction. One of their big things was they don't collect any kind of demographic information, and so they don't actually know who they're serving and how they can better serve them. They want to maintain and improve the programs and operations that they currently have, and they want to streamline core data management so that it isn't a burden on any of the employees. When we got to strategy and program design, we worked on logic models, which there's 4 big important reasons that logic models are so important. First, they're the core of a focused management plan. I mean, it really streamlines what you're going to do and lays it out in a really concise way. It informs and teaches stakeholders, so when they're asking you, why do you have this program and how does that lead to, like, how does art lead to greater economic development, you can really lay it out in a visual way that also depends the reasons you're doing the things you want to do. Also, it really helps identify gaps in strategies. That you can't make a linear line from like what you do to your outcome, that you know that you're missing something in the middle and you really need to address it. And also it highlights the most important connections. So if you're going to be communicating this to other people, you really know where you want to put the focus. I have some examples of logic models that I made for them. So when we're going back to the 3 questions, how much did it cost, what did it do, and like who cares? So this is how much did it cost? How much financial resources, human resources, social capital, physical space did we have to invest into this project or organization? Activities and outputs are how much did it do? So like with this stuff that we've invested, how much were we actually able to put out there and roll out in the community? And then outcomes and impact are how much did it matter? Like did these things, if these went exactly the way we wanted them to, did it actually make the change that we're trying to make? And you'll see with the organization and then also the 2 following programmatic logic models, they look very different, but the end result is all citywide economic growth. First, data collection. You want to identify your key performance indicators. So if you're looking at your logic model, when you're looking at your outputs and your outcomes, and you're saying, like, how do we know if we actually succeeded? That's what a key performance indicator is. They're measurable, they're relevant, they're useful, and they can be accessed in a timely manner. If you can't get it, if you can't get it in a reasonable time frame, there's no use in even identifying it as a key performance indicator, because if you can't collect it, you can't measure it. When you're developing your instruments, let's see, when I work with Arthur Business Council, we did 2 kinds of evaluation, direct and indirect. Direct are things that you can measure without someone's input. So you use it with tests, quizzes. Did this product actually happen? Did this case have a favorable outcome for our clients? Indirect is things that people report, so it's surveys, it's feedback, it's focus groups, that sort of thing. The assessments that we use in our tools were, they wanted to identify how these things were working, so needs, processes, efficiency, and then the impact and outcome of their programs. These are some of the surveys that I developed for them. This is for one program, but I kept them pretty similar across programs because I wanted them to be able to compare and contrast their programming. So section 1, quality session, is just to identify, did we put this on the way that we wanted to put it on? So it has nothing to do with the outcomes. It's just like, did we provide the tools that people need, and were they developed in an organized and professional way? Section 2 is, did the things that we provide them actually help them? Did they value them? And section 3 is outcomes and impact. So if these 2 things were done right, did the change that we want to have happen? And so I measured understanding and confidence, because if you understand something but you don't feel like you're going to be able to carry it out in the program, then it doesn't really do any change for what you're trying to make happen after you graduate. Finally, it was the next steps, so we could really tweak our programming. It's not so much the outcomes, but for session content itself. So which things were the most valuable, which things could be improved, and then what questions do you still have? So we can make these changes either in the next session or the next cohort. Here's program data and program dashboards. I'm not going to go into them, but the program data was per session. Program dashboards were per year. So you could compare session by session, whether or not understanding had gone up or down, or, how many people had attended, because that way you can say, oh, like people really had low satisfaction rates, but like, are you not satisfied because of the content we're producing, or because you haven't been doing the homework or going to any of the sessions? Data interpretation is the next thing. 3 best practices for data interpretation are, you got to keep all the original data. You want to make sure that you're using methodology that works for the kind of data that's being used, and you want to make sure regularly that you're looking at the questions and the answers and asking, are there any questions that we haven't asked, or are the answers creating new questions that maybe we didn't know that we should have been asking? I created memos for them that outline methodology of the survey, the key findings, the strengths, the areas for improvement, and what recommendations should come from that. If you're interested later, we can go over it. I also created 2 interactive apps so they could look at the open-ended feedback, because people don't like looking at spreadsheets, and statistically, if people can interact with data and find it novel, they're more likely to internalize it and use it in their practices. Data acceptance. So when you're presenting findings, these are very professional. When you're presenting findings, you want to make sure that you start with the end, because people don't have a lot of time and they get bored really fast. They really want to know. I mean, we all know people like this, but but it's also like the whip 'em, the what's in it for me. Open with that, because otherwise you're going to lose it right away. You don't want to just be sharing data, but you want to be sharing insight. So like, okay, 94% of people said this. What does that mean? You know, like, does it mean that people are satisfied, or does it mean that people like want to see change? Like, I need to know what these numbers are actually telling me. I can read a number, you know, maybe I can read a number. I had statistics. Sometimes I can't read a number. And then you want to have clear findings, strong conclusions. You don't want to have ambiguous things. You want to have things that people can turn data into action. That's the most important part of the data-informed culture. The next thing is that, making decisions based on this data. So after you present it, how do you do data-driven decision making? You want to, some of the things you want to consider when you're looking at data and trying to decide what kind of decisions you need to make. You want to compare it to the past performances of the program and the targets that you had. You want to look at the data across different demographic groups and see how it's different. For example, one of the programs we had showed that confidence before and after the program was high, and it increased for every single age group except for people over 50 where it actually declined. So that's something we need to look at. Maybe it was a technological issue, maybe it's something where, which actually in a lot of open feedback people said, like, we need to have microphones, and so it's like you might be less confident because you feel like everyone else was learning and you were lost because you couldn't hear what was going on. You want to look at other characteristics that are particularly likely to affect performance. People's satisfaction rate, for example, for like a volunteer lawyer association, might be lower because of the kind of case that they had, not because of who they are or the performance of the attorney. Individual service unit and service delivery is something you want to look at, and then also the difficulty of the incoming workload. So you don't want to be comparing across the same span people who have like 50 times higher workload than other people, where performance should really be equitable across all of the considerations for the job. Data integration. Aside from data-informed culture, once everything is integrated, this is some of the stuff that you're going to be wanting to see. You want to see informed operational and programmatic decisions. You want to see time and resources budgeted for data, because you can say you want to change your culture all you want, but if you're not putting in the money and the legwork, it's not going to happen. People are busy. So you want data collected and analyzed regularly, not just what reporters do, but just because you're trying to find out how you can improve your program and learn more about your stakeholders. You want data used at all staff levels. It aggregates upwards. Individual employees learn about the program. Managers learn about the multiple employees they manage. The CEO learns about the different silos in the organization. Donors want to look across all the different organizations and see who's the best fit, etc. You want to have a culture where questions and inquiry are encouraged and people aren't just nodding at you or like feeling like they're not allowed to question the status quo because that's the way that it's done. When you're trying to implement a data-informed culture, these are some of the common challenges that people face. There's not enough time. You don't know what you're measuring. With stuff like art, it's so abstract and nebulous. How do you know if someone feels more creative? Like, how do you even quantify that? Sometimes privacy. For example, when I was doing this project, I didn't have access to their database, and so if people have sensitive information, it's hard to measure because there might be some sorts of, HIPAA violation where you're not able to easily measure this. Resistance. People don't like change sometimes. Sometimes I like going into an organization where everything's going up in flames because that's when people are more likely to be like, you gotta do something, you know? Where meanwhile, if things aren't going down the toilet, then people are like, it's cool how it is, you know? So I think the takeaway there is just drive things into the toilet so that you can really and then finally, for every organization, especially public service organizations, limited capacity. So you're already overwhelmed, you don't have enough time. How do you pull on this other thing, especially if you don't have background in data? I gotta learn something new? I don't think so. So we bring in, brainiacs like all of us to help you figure it out. With Arts and Business Council, they actually did a really great job. They already valued data. They regularly visited it. I saw them make changes in their programming as we went. A lot of the things that are my recommendations are things that happen after I'm gone. So they're long-term things that they just couldn't have done now because we only started the program now. So one, they want to clarify core session outcomes and align their session elements. So in their training programs, they want to have a core outcome for each session that they when people leave this program, what should they have learned? So right now, the people who present in their programs are donors, and so what they're doing is donors say, here's what I want to talk about, and they're taking that and kind of trying to group them into whose things fit together best, where then you're at the mercy of whatever people want to talk about, and you're not actually planning your program based on best practices. Next, you want to look at long-term data collection and analysis dates, and then identify data point people. So so that people know when it's coming up and not like, oh, we haven't done this in a while, when should it happen? You want to have things regularly revisited, and you want to know who's in charge of it, because that way those people can become better informed in making data synthesis. And then you want to regularly evaluate data to ensure that the indicators align with key outcomes. A lot of the things that we were coming up when we were doing this project where people were saying, oh, this is in our survey, but we don't actually look at that. That program doesn't actually exist anymore. So like, it's just regularly saying like, oh, we've changed our program. Are these metrics still relevant, or do we need to revisit what we're measuring? And conclusion. So here's to all of you and all of us. And are there any questions?
Where do you find all these Simpsons kids?
I mean, come on, man. Like, just got a lying around. I actually had to cut out a lot of them. Like, I was like, oh man, it's like Sophie's Choice Zones. I was like, this isn't good content, but the meme is so good.
But you asked a legitimate question. Yeah, that's not a legitimate question. Did you run into issues where if you're training people to use data, but say maybe people don't have like the arm skills? Like, how do you deal with that?
See, I made sure that the instruments that we were using were really user-friendly. So everything that we were doing was on Google Drive, so that people can easily access and share it. And then because none of the data that we're collecting is sensitive, then we don't have to worry about the security issues that sometimes exist with Google. And then to make sure that people were able to synthesize it, the person that I'm trying to like help be the data person after I leave. So when we got data from this last session, I gave her the data, and then I worked with the data separately, and then we got back together, and I was like, what were your findings on the data, and here's what my findings were, and let's talk about that, so that she's getting practice in synthesizing the data herself. And you can do it as analogs if you want. All of our surveys were paper surveys, not just because that's easier for people to work with, because it's not technological, but also because statistically, when you give someone a paper survey before they leave, they're much more likely to fill it out than if you give them an app or a link that they're going to do.
Thank you. I feel like that was like drinking from a fire hose of like how to get your organization to be data informed. So I feel a lot more informed. What would you say was like the biggest barrier specifically for A and BC in terms of like those realistic like?
The two biggest barriers, one is that they're part of the Chamber of Commerce, and so there's a lot of push on the financial bottom line, and so they're like, this is better for our program, and it's a long-term investment, so you're not going to see financial turnarounds now, you're going to see them later, and then having people who are like, no, we want to see them now, like, we're spending all this money and we're not seeing results, not really understanding like these things take time to change a culture and to like better understand things. And then the other thing is that like it's art. And so how do you measure these things is really difficult. Like how do you measure what a leader is? How do you measure creativity? How do you measure if someone feels better well-being? You know, like these are really hard things to find metrics for. And so there's a lot of, not pushback, but a lot of back and forth about like what are the best questions to ask to find out that kind of thing.
You talked about like implementing like a data-informed culture. What were like the resistance to like all these like processes and whatnot, or any best practices you can call from it? Because it's been like 6 years for me, and I'm having Slack meltdowns about my time not being respected.
You say what was the resistance to the process?
Yeah, was there any resistance, or like any best practices you can have in like having staff collect extra information? Like you said, I'm old, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. I think the reason that this project worked so well is because Marquita was so positive about data, and because if you're going to change the culture, it has to start with leadership. Otherwise, it's just going to die, because that's who controls the money and the budget at the time to make this sort of thing sustainable. Also, like the fact that they were already doing some data collection. So like I said, the WIFM, it's like when you're trying to make things sustainable, you have to say, here's how it's going to make your job easier, because no one wants to take on something else unless you say like, this is one extra thing you're doing now, and it's going to reduce your workload by 50% later. It's going to make so much easier for you to report to grantees or grantors, or this is the sort of thing that's going to look really good in marketing. You know, so that like when you're saying like, let's do data, you can like create these tangible deliverables that for whatever bucket their career is in, they can see how it's going to benefit them directly. But also, some people are just never going to, value data because they're behind the times.
Any final questions?